Is it working? Yes? No? Okay. It is. Good morning, everyone. I hope you had a restful night. I know yesterday was a really packed day, including towards the very late evening. I hope others will get into the room as they realize we're starting. But my name is Yelena Sokova. I'm the executive director of the Vienna Center for Disarmament and Non-Proliferation, and I'm really happy to chair today's panel, the first panel in the morning, which is use as an agent of change. I think we had a very good introduction yesterday during the forum on global citizenship and youth inclusion about why it is important to engage the next generation in the most important security, arms control, non-proliferation issues, disarmament. And our panel, I thought, would probably go beyond just acknowledging that and really focus on different roles that the youth plays, and also look at the engagement and various ways and paths how to engage youth more effectively in the conversation, in access to the decision makers, influencing the policy, what we can learn from other fields, from the environment and climate change movement, from the human rights area, including inclusion and diversity, also the fields where we know that there are many different ways to engage participants and move forward. You know, particularly if you look at the nuclear issues, some of the early engagement came from the environmental groups, particularly with regards to nuclear testing. And you know all now the name of the famous teenager from Sweden, Greta Thunberg, who became kind of a name and a face of the youth actions towards the climate change. We have an excellent panel today that will look at different ways for engaging the next generation. We have a member of the CTBTO youth group. We have a leader of young South African nuclear physicist organization. We have a distinguished professor from Nagasaki University focusing on the education. And we have an award-winning blogger from Morocco with the expertise on engaging youth in the human rights and freedom of speech issues. I also want to, before we move into the discussion, I wanted to really commend the Comprehensive Test-Ban Treaty Organization for establishing a youth group 3 years ago in 2016. I think their passion, enthusiasm, creativity, and professionalism are really admirable. They are really innovative and articulate. And I would really like to, for those of you who received the packets yesterday or today through registration, to point to this newsletter, newsroom, and really take a moment to read through some of their wonderful articles. Again, this is big kudos to the organization for championing this initiative. Without further ado, I would like to introduce our first panelist. Marjan Norton is originally from Kazakhstan and is actively involved in the CTBTO youth group. She serves as CTBTO youth group outreach coordinator, and she has traveled extensively around the world to represent the CTBTO at diplomatic gatherings, workshops, and public events. She also served as coordinator for the Commonwealth of Independent States for the Parliamentarians for Nuclear Non-Proliferation and Disarmament. She is the convener of the Abolition 2000 Youth Network, and in 2017, she was invited to address nuclear disarmament to the United Nations General Assembly on the International Day for the Total Elimination of Nuclear Weapons. As a member of the CTBTO youth group, I would really like to hear from you. I know you have some other thoughts as well. Maybe how can this group contribute to the treaty entry into force? I also would be, and I'm sure you all would be interested to hear what motivated you to engage with these issues related to nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation. Why, what made you to really engage in this field? Marjan, the floor is yours.
Good morning. Thank you for a kind introduction. And dear ladies and gentlemen, friends and colleagues, I'm very happy to be here, and I would like to, first of all, express my gratitude to the CTBTO for inviting me to speak and to have this opportunity to be here with you today and with the panelists. I also would like to thank personally Francesca and also Dr. Zerbo to commend his commitment for including youth engagement into the issues of global peace and security, in particular nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation. There are three main reasons why I have got involved into the topic of nuclear disarmament, and due to the time constraints, I have decided to highlight these ones. And first of all, I'm coming from Kazakhstan, the country which experienced the horrors of nuclear tests for almost half of the century, for 40 years, during the Soviet Union times, from 1949 until 1989. As a result of those nuclear testing, around 1.5 million were affected, and they still suffer from the transgenerational impact of health diseases, of cancer, of birth deformities. And just to give you an idea about the size of the test site, the Semipalatinsk nuclear test site, it's equal to the size of Belgium or Israel. As it was mentioned during the opening session of Science and Technology conference, someone mentioned that technologies, innovation, and cooperation are the main stance of the conference. And I would like to pick up on cooperation. I was really inspired by the anti-nuclear movement called Nevada Semipalatinsk, which originated from Kazakhstan and was led by the poet and politician Olzhas Suleymenov and was created in 1989 to close the test sites and to stop the nuclear testing. And you can hear from the name of the movement that it stands Nevada for the Nevada test site in the United States and Semipalatinsk test site in Kazakhstan. And during the Cold War time, when two opposite sides were divided, the Soviet Union and the United States of America, nevertheless, people came together, united in their fight for nuclear disarmament with the one aim to stop testing. And actually, this movement turned into a global, big grassroots organization, Nevada Semipalatinsk, and it was so successful that they could gather 5,000 people to protests. They could gather and collect 2 million signatures in the times when no technologies or no internet was existing, no social media. And they were so much successful that they were able to close the test site. One of the last reasons that I got involved into nuclear disarmament is the different impact of the radiation and nuclear tests on the health of women and children. According to the scientific studies, women and children are affected more than men. And this meaning that women have difficulties to deliver a child, and children they are born with deformities and abnormalities. And all these three reasons served for me as important message to get involved into the field of nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation as a young woman, as a representative of the present generation, but also caring about the future generations. I think during the conference, the narrative was about mostly future generations, but I think that we should be careful and we should actually be active in the present time with the present generation and involve more young people, as well as educate them about the issues of global peace and security. And this is one of the important aspects, not just to engage people, but also enable them, empower them, so that they are informed and they know how to apply their skills, their knowledge, and be helpful in achieving the world free of nuclear weapons and nuclear tests, in order to ensure that we live in a world which is habitable, which is sustainable and livable not only for us, but also for the future generations. And lastly, I would like to mention about the words of the President Fisher, and also refer to Ban Ki-moon's statement that the world is overarmed and peace is underfunded. And this is also one of the issues that today around $1 trillion are spent on nuclear weapons and in general on the military spending. And I think that this money could be spent instead on meeting sustainable development goals, as well as providing more opportunities for young people. Thank you.
Thank you, Marjan. I know that at this conference there are a number of representatives from the CTBTO youth group. I don't know how many there are in this particular room, but if there are, could you raise your hands? Oh, wow. Very nice. And some of you spoke yesterday at other panels. It's really, really great. But we can probably return in the Q&As later to some of the points you made, but I really liked your message about enabling and empowering both youth and people in general. That's a very powerful message. Our next panelist is Gopalelve Santsveria, but he likes to be called JP, which is much easier for me. He's a nuclear physicist at the South African Nuclear Energy Corporation. JP holds a master's degree, has been working in the nuclear industry since 2006. He started work at the Department of Minerals and Energy, now the Department of Energy. He then joined ESCOM, and before he went to work for the South African Nuclear Energy Corporation. He is also the president of the newly formed South Africa Young Nuclear Professionals Organization, with a passionate belief that science doesn't have to be boring and daunting. He pursues the innovative approach to the intimidating subjects of both science and physics. He believes that the way of teaching math and science has to change, and for this to happen, we need to train the trainer. So I'm really interested to hear from you how you who work in the nuclear energy and represent the young South African nuclear physicists, how are you engaging young scientists and engaging them in being prepared to address the many challenges that they will be confronted with in the future. And what ways does your organization contribute to influence energy policy in South Africa? And what inspires your members to be active?
All right, let me probably start by concluding in that, the growth and widening inequalities, which are of all forms, which have sort of denied access to energy, access to food, access to clean water, are the greatest threat to any national stability. So I think when we sit here, any solution or any probably policies or whatever solution that we come with, which does not address these issues, will be short-lived. I think this issue was also probably well documented by one of the greatest economists, which is Thomas Piketty, when he says the price of inequalities. So the South African nuclear youth young professionals started on the basis that we thought, nuclear was not well understood. Therefore, when policymakers try to derive or establish policies to expand the nuclear industry, there is no proper public support, because why? People don't know what is this industry, because the industry started from a bad food. We started first by killing before we do it for peaceful purposes. So those are the things that drove us as young professionals to say we need to organize ourselves from all the different disciplines within the nuclear industry so that we can educate, firstly, the public to say, what is nuclear and what is nuclear used for? So since our establishment, we've seen that there's been greatest improvement, because now people start to understand, nuclear is not such a bad thing. Nuclear, actually, we love even one of the mottos of the company that I work for, which is the South African Nuclear Energy Corporation. It says, we are in your world. So we took that motto, we dissected it, and said, how is nuclear industry in every South African's life? Firstly, we have a power station that gives them electricity. Secondly, we've got a research reactor that does not only do research, but it provides radiopharmaceuticals, which are there for diagnosis and also for treatment. And we've got some of the best academic hospitals in the country that people go there daily, but they did not know where are this product produced from. So thirdly, we've got an agricultural sector that depends on the nuclear technique, for irradiation of food, which is there in the country. I mean, we've got 4 facilities that exist in the whole country. And then there's quite a number of issues that, or products that come from the nuclear industry. So therefore, we took that and said, how is nuclear industry in their world? And then that is one of the things that we started to be active into, to say that why didn't this go and educate the public? So for that, we started from lower grade up until universities, because even students at university don't know what is nuclear. They don't know what opportunities lies within the nuclear industry. So we've been very, very we took that wide approach, and we are continuously trying to improve, because even the way we communicate science, sometimes we find that as a scientist, I think when I say E equals to MC squared, everyone knows. But you need to unpack it to a simpler child to say, like, if you eat something in the morning, not all of it will go to waste. Some, it will be converted to energy. And this is exactly why we need to relate to that. So as signups, we don't only believe in educating the public, we also need to educate policymakers. Because policymakers, remember, politicians, that don't necessarily mean they will have the right discipline to lead a certain sector. So you need to start educating them to say, nuclear is beyond energy, or is beyond electricity production. So how is nuclear important to the country? That is why I think, I don't know if you have noticed, in the country we've been debating on the integrated resource plan. And we've been debating this since 2010. It changes every year because people don't understand, or because of other issues beyond that. So this is how we also part of that. Not only the integrated resource plan on energy, we also look into the climate, the national adaptation strategy on climate change, because it is also part of it. We need to say that how can nuclear industry play a critical role in all the 17 sustainable development goals? And we have witnessed, not only seen, that it plays a very critical role in each and every one of those SDGs. So the solution that should bring should not only be a solution of giving me electricity. I want something beyond electricity. Because once I have the light, I need to pay for those tariffs. So hence I'm saying energy is not only about provision of electricity, but it's also about industrializing the country. It's about reducing the inequalities. So if you can look at the policy making in such a way, we will see that we'll go beyond that. So maybe lastly is that we not only did not, we went beyond that. We have now recently established what we call the African Young Generation in Nuclear, because we've seen that a lot of African counterparts, our young professionals within the continent, are not participating actively in the nuclear space, whereas there's a lot of nuclear, if you look at the IEA technical cooperation, that happens within the continent. So we does that not only looking in the country, but also looking outside into the continent, so that together we can move the continent forward. So thank you.
Thank you. And I think you hit very also important points about nuclear being just beyond the electricity and power. I actually was privileged to visit Pelindaba facilities, including some of the medical isotope production facilities for treatment, for diagnostics, and definitely you speak passionately about it. I'm sure your network grows every day. But I would like to move to my left now to Professor Tatsuchiro Suzuki, or Tatsu Suzuki. He's a director and professor at the Research Center for Nuclear Weapons Abolition, RECNA, at Nagasaki University, Japan. Before joining RECNA, he was a vice chairman of Japan Atomic Energy Commission of the Cabinet Office from January 2010 to April 2014. Until then, he was an associate vice president of the Central Research Institute of Electric Power Industry in Japan, and also held a number of academic positions before that. So somebody who crossed both the industry, decision-making line, and the academic. But particularly, I'm interested in your academic work nowadays. Nagasaki was one of the two cities that actually experienced the nuclear weapon. But at the same time, it was almost like 74 years ago. And the next generation probably doesn't know much about it, despite I'm sure it's probably more prominent in Nagasaki in Japan, but overall, we're a little bit in that complacency and too many years passed since then. And I would really like to hear from you what you do at your university. How do you engage students? How do you reach out to other universities in Japan and in the world? But also, like, what is different with this generation? Because it's different approaches that you probably need to consider in the work. Professor Suzuki.
Well, thank you. As you can see, I'm not necessarily qualified as a CTBT youth organization on this panel, but I'm happy to be invited to be on the panel. Thank you very much. As Elina said, that Nagasaki is, of course, a special place. Actually, Nagasaki University was destroyed by the bomb. At that time, it was a medical school, and all 900 people, students and teachers, were killed instantly. So Nagasaki University have a special mission and responsibility for both research and education programs. And they established the Atomic Bomb Disease Institute in 1962, which now became the mecca of the radiation impacts, of the health impacts of the radiation. And they helped also the victim of Chernobyl and Kazakhstan, the nuclear testing also. Now they're helping also the Fukushima accident, also victims too. So that was one big institute we are having. And another one, the RECNA, Research Center for Nuclear Weapons Abolition, was established in 2012, relatively new. This was inspired by the President Obama's speech in 2009. And our mission is, of course, to do research and also to have public outreach and also next generation of nuclear disarmament experts. So that's the main purpose of the center. We have a public outreach programs, we have a seminar, and also we publish every year beautifully designed poster showing how many nuclear warheads exist in the world. And since 2014, we started to publish also how much fissile materials, nuclear material exists in the world. So those are very good starting point of the discussion of nuclear disarmament. Those posters and the textbooks are distributed among the local schools and high schools, junior high school, and even elementary schools. But one of the biggest program we have is called Nagasaki Youth Delegation. Every year we dispatch roughly 8 to 10 young students to the NPT review conference or PrepCom and let them experience at the conference, and they have their own interviews with the diplomats and experts and exchange with other young students, young people, like, and so they have their own experience through those events. And then, for instance, when they explain the Hibakusha experience to the other countries' young people, they always got the response that what happened with Japan had many bad things, on North Korea, I mean Korea and China. So they have to go back to study the history of Japanese, what the Japanese did during the World War II. So when they come back, they established their own peace education programs, including all these past history of what the Japanese did during the war. Unfortunately, these days, the government tried to restrict those activities on the peace education programs, only focusing on the Hibakusha story, but not telling what the Japan did during World War II. But the Japanese students, those young students trying to resist those things, it is a courageous thing for them to do. And they have their own also curriculum packages to teach in the junior high school. And they have their own also presentation at the NPT PrepCom. This year, they made a nice presentation about the Hibakusha, but they define the they came up with a new definition of Hibakusha. One is, of course, the Hibakusha of the bomb, victim of the bomb. Second is the victim of the nuclear testing and also the nuclear accident. The third category, they say, is all humans are Hibakusha. The conservative people like us, the older generation, say, oh, that's maybe too much. But they came up with a very nice presentation telling the young people, all the people, diplomats in the room, saying, all of you could become a victim of Hibakusha if somebody pushed the button. So that was a very strong message to the people. The most important thing in this youth delegation we are concerned about is that all the Hibakusha stories in the past were told of the past history. But this history should be translated into the existing threats, how the people can feel the threats of nuclear weapons right now. Particularly the younger generation, as you said, don't have any experience of the war. So many younger generation started to think, why not nuclear weapons, even for Japan, considering the North Korean and Chinese threats. So the most important thing for them is to let them think, let them be aware of the nuclear risk in the current generation. That's the most important message we're trying to deliver. We have also graduate courses. We just started the graduate course in nuclear disarmament. We encourage the young professionals and also the business people. We have one of the students right now is from a local TV company. And we try to also create a PhD program. So we try to be a main place for the nuclear graduate courses of nuclear education in the future. So those are the things we are able to do. The most important difficult thing is, of course, the average age of hibakusha is now higher than 82 now. So we are facing the era that maybe we cannot listen to the hibakusha story anymore. So I think the most important thing right now is to the younger generation to think the nuclear threat as a real and that it exists right now. So that's my point.
Thank you, Tatsu. I also wanted to pick up on something that you said about the engagement of high school students. Actually, at the James Martin Center for Nonproliferation Studies, where I worked for almost 20 years, we have a high school program that brings together students from the United States, the Russian Federation, and Japan. It has been active for now over 20 years as well, as far as I know. And one of the issues when we first thought about engaging high school students was maybe it's too early. And there were many skeptics about that. But I must say these are really smart kids and really passionate of what they do. And I think it's really important to think about outreach and education, even at the high school level. I'm not even kind of, without really contesting the importance of the college education and graduate and professional education. Thank you, Tatsu, for that. Our next panelist is Hin Tuisat. She is a social entrepreneur, citizen journalist, an award-winning blogger, and human rights activist from Morocco. She is the founder and president of Better Changemakers, a social enterprise with the aim to empower Moroccan kids and youth to create a positive change in the community by turning schools and universities into hubs of creativity, innovation, and social change. She is also a PhD student, conducting research about female social entrepreneurship in the MENA region. She was voted the best female blogger in Morocco at the Morocco Web Awards in 2012 for her blog. And she also was nominated for the award by the Elim magazine for defending freedom of speech. I'm really interested to hear from you because it is something that is really, the next generation is really active using, social networking, communicating through various social platforms. What inspired you to believe that your voice is important and that you could have an impact on your society? So what are the also positive and negative effects of using social media to kind of inspire people or to look at changing certain things in the society or policies? Hind, I'm really looking forward to your presentation.
I'm really humbled to be here, to be quite honest, and I would like to thank you for inviting me. I think the motivation of having a voice can simply be not wanting to be silent, because according to me, or the way I see it, silence has been one of our humanity's biggest crime throughout history. Us humans, we have suffered more at the hands of each other than through natural disasters, if we're talking statistics. By the year 1914, we have invited not only a great thing like internal combustion engines, but also bombs. And this intelligence was used at one point many times in the service of madness. And millions of people, hundreds of millions of people have died because of our human intelligence. But that's not really the only bad thing about it. I mean, we have used it in our own good, for our own good, to create electricity. We have invented a great thing that have allowed my generation to not be silent, to feel like we can actually make a change, and that is social media. I can say that I'm very fortunate to be part of this generation, which to other generations might not be as effective, because we spend a lot of times on this. But at the same time, there are people who are way more effective than I'll ever be. People as young as 12 years old who have used their voices and their online accounts in order to raise awareness about really important topics. People who have actually sacrificed their lives in order to just draw a little bit of attention to something that is going on in their country, who have seen the blue Instagram change of profiles lately. That's just a person, part of my generation. His name is Mohammed Hashim Matar, who is a British Sudanese young man who lost his life in his country, defending what him and his generation thought was right, and that is freedom, dignity, and having a voice. Now, my generation kind of goes both ways. There are people who use it in order to promote makeup and fashion. That's totally fine. And there are other people who use it in order to really advocate for important matters. If I can give an example, in my country, back in 2012, a young 16-year-old girl was forced to marry her rapist, because that, unfortunately, was a rule or a law in my country. It was Article 475. And thanks to this, thanks to a lot of hashtags, people took their advocacy from Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram to the streets. And anybody who is from the MENA region, that's North Africa and the Middle East, knows how hard it can be and how dangerous it can be to take your voice out to the street and face the police and other organizations that do not want you to speak out loud. That girl lost her life, unfortunately, and that was the reason of the whole anger that started back in 2013. It took 1 year of advocacy in order to change that one article, and that is just one campaign that actually succeeded just in Morocco. But we're in the MENA region, we're talking about at least 12 countries that may seem very similar, or they might look the same to people looking from outside, even to us. But when you go there, when you meet the young people who are, again, part of my generation, every single person has a different stand, a different point of view, and we're not as afraid as our parents were to express what we really think. And I think that is how social media has changed the whole status quo. And I'm really thankful for having a voice here. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Hind. So we've heard from all our different panelists regarding different aspects of their work and how they use different tools. But what I would really like to maybe pose a question to all of you is, despite the nuclear issues being so prominent, and many professional world in diplomacy, in certain fora, yet we don't have such a kind of extended involvement of youth in these issues. It's really commending that these groups are created now. We pay more attention of it, but what do you think could be done to really expand the engagement of youth in these issues? And what are in your views, are the biggest challenges in having this new generation engaging policymakers, so that their voice reaches them and they actually could influence the decision making? So with this kind of two-sided question, maybe I will start maybe I will start with you, Hind, actually, because it wasn't the nuclear issues you worked on, but your experience also is important in terms of how do you engage the next generation, how do you make these issues relevant to them, and also maybe working with the decision makers.
I think the answer could be, I'm not sure, but it could be GCED, or what is called global citizenship education. Because we're not just supposed to know the history of our country, we're supposed to know the history of the whole world in order to not really believe that we're the center of the universe, because we're really not. The Earth is round, so whatever you point out, that's the center of the universe. And I think with issues like global warming or nuclear power in general, we still have people who are a bit doubtful about the importance of learning about this. Parents would come up to me and ask me, why should my child know about sexual harassment at the age of 15? And I'm like, that's really important because 1, 2, 3, 4. So as long as there's a communication going, as long as people are willing to know more about these issues, it all comes back to GCED. And I was lucky enough to be one of 10 young people around the world who kind of brainstormed the whole idea, and we know for a fact throughout the past 5 years that it actually works, that it actually crafts a future generation, hopefully, that is more acceptant, not even tolerant, acceptant of new ideas, of the differences and the beautiful diversity that we have around the world, and issues that may sound out of league to young people are not really, because at the end of the day, there will come a day where they will face the consequences if they don't know. So it's better to know.
Thank you. Tatsu, would you like to? Oops, sorry.
Yes, the classic answer is, of course, please come to Hiroshima and Nagasaki to visit the museums and talk to the Hibakusha. And that's still very important, to let them be aware of what the consequences of nuclear weapons. But not all of them can come. And so the next thing we try to do is, they like, of course, social media and also pop culture, animation, books, the cartoons. There are very interesting these days animation films or cartoons that can address those risks of nuclear wars, nuclear issues. Like a movie like Terminator, whatever. These are things that people don't realize how the movie can describe the nuclear war. And that's one thing we can do. And also, you have to probably combine with other social environmental issues like SDGs. People are very interested in SDGs. So it's not just nuclear, but it's incorporated with other social issues that they may be interested in. To engage with the policymakers, we try to invite the prominent experts or policymakers who come to Nagasaki. We have a small group of discussion, so that they can feel that the politicians are not too far, they're very close. So that's one thing we should do, to have a direct communication with the policymakers. Particularly, what they can do is to talk to the local policymakers. And there's a campaign right now by ICANN Japan that they do ask each parliamentarians whether they are in favor of ban treaty or not. Just very simple question, but that will give a pressure on the policymakers to answer to those younger generations. So I think the direct exchange with the policymakers is one way to let them aware that they are not too far. But the most important thing is, of course, let them go to the voting. Unfortunately, younger generation in Japan right now, they don't go to vote. The voting rate in Japan is, for younger generation, only less than 30%. That's not good. So we very encourage them to go to the voting.
Thank you, Tatsu. I don't know how much time we have because we started late. We're kind of 10 minutes? Okay, wonderful. So then I will ask also JP and then Marjan to give their views on the questions that I posed, and then I will open the floor to the audience.
One of the best ways of engaging youth, which we have seen over the years, is that if something is not relevant to their everyday experience, they don't sort of get involved or interested in. So one of the issues that we've been trying as a drive is to say that whenever we have outreach campaigns, is to ask in all the students who attend at that particular moment, how many of them have been directly or indirectly affected by cancer. And you find that when they start to say, I know my mom has been dead, has gone to the hospital. So you start to engage in that particular interest. And in that way, you start having more kids starting to be interested to say, okay, how is this affecting me, and therefore sort of so. And then you start explaining the mechanism of treating that, and why is the industry or whatever the industry has to do with the policymakers to drive that particular development so that it can improve the lives of the ordinary. And also one of the key issues is that we are also heavily involved on the media in terms of talk radio. Because you find that the talk radios, they don't have a subject to talk about. So when you come and interest them with something that affects us on daily basis, they tend to listen to you and they tend to open up and have more discussion. So you start to having more people starting to discuss. And also university radio stations, because you have university radio stations that are sitting there that are not properly used. So those are the things that we should try to move into. Because, with social media, you can only do so much. But personal talk is mostly a very effective way of making sure that you drive the narrative. And besides, even your policymakers or politicians, sometimes when they're sitting in the car from one meeting to the other, when they hear on radio something is being spoken about, it sort of gives them that kind of particular interest to say, maybe we should go and ask the public, what is it that they want to do? So until we start to do that, we were not going to move forward. And then one key element also is that there must be constant knocking on politicians' door. If you don't do that, they are not going to, they think that everything is rosy. So we've seen, last year we had a very, very public hearing at Parliament. And when we went to the Parliament and presented, we found so many policymakers from different political parties. They were so shocked of the narrative that we brought to the table, because everything, some of them, they did not even know. I will tell you the honest truth. They did not even know 30 kilometers away from them, there was a nuclear power station. And we take it for granted that they know. 30 kilometers away from Parliament, there's Quebec nuclear power station. And they did not know. They said Quebec is somewhere in Europe or America. So I think that's what we need to do. Make the discussion relevant to everyday's life. Then we'll change. And including even the CTBTO, I'll tell you there's a lot of things that we can take away from it and present to the public to say why we need to safeguard the peaceful use of nuclear. Because if you don't, it will be the destruction of human beings. So I'm very glad that we are having this discussion there, because we need to take this discussion to say why peaceful purpose, it needs to be constantly hammered into our daily life so that we understand that use nuclear responsibly, you're going to have dire consequences. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, JP. Marjan?
Yeah, I have a paper with so many ideas, and I'm just trying to put it together. First of all, I would like to say that CTBTO Youth Group is a group with diverse backgrounds, comprising 700 students and young professionals coming from around 90 countries. And this is something which gives opportunity for us as young people to come together and have a place to collaborate and as well as exchange ideas with the notion of associating ourselves as global citizens, because we would like to achieve a universal ban on nuclear tests. I was thinking about the ways how we should raise public awareness amongst young people as well as general public. So I have been recently asking some of my CTBTO Youth Group fellows if they have seen the series recently shown by HBO called Chernobyl. So I think it depends on the language you use to talk to young people, because sometimes you feel that it's not only enough to have education in a traditional way, but you should also use some other innovative ways of engaging more people. And actually there is a Facebook group, a fan page of the series, which is having around 11,000 people when I saw it last time. And the number of people who are young is quite major. Raising awareness publicly, from my own experience, I would say organizing events to commemorate international days. So for example, there is International Day Against Nuclear Tests on August 29. There is Hiroshima and Nagasaki Days on August 6 and 9th. There is International Peace Day, which is September 21st. So there are many more opportunities how every day you can make a change. I'm sure the calendar is full of international days. Sometimes you don't even need to have this international day, but it will give more significance and importance to justify your actions, probably. The movie screenings, which was mentioned by Tatsu, I think it's also one of the good ways to engage public. I can speak from my own experience when I conducted movie screenings back home on the documentary called Where the Wind Blew, and which is also telling the stories of people being affected in the Nevada test site and the Semipalatinsk test site, and sharing their personal stories, which also gives a personal attachment and makes you feel a human being, because this is one humankind. And there was one quote said that mothers cry the same, so the tears are the same. When one woman was sharing her personal story of losing a child in an early age. There is much more to say, but for example, on voice, CTBTO Youth Group has a newsroom, which was already shown at the beginning by Elena, which gives opportunity to raise your voice and also be heard and be read, as well as have a feedback and connection. And thanks to the CTBTO Youth Group, again, drawing from my personal experience, there is opportunity for young people to get engaged in high-level events. For example, the Non-Proliferation Treaty review conferences or PrepCom conferences, where CTBTO is taking leadership on organizing side events, as well as providing the official statements during the official meetings. And I was also privileged to speak in one of those events. And in general, I would like to say there are so many opportunities, and it's just about will, interest, and being active. And when it comes to legislators, I'm working with the members of parliament, and I can say that one of the easiest way you can contact to your member of parliament and say, why not to organize motions or debates on the CTBT and the entry into force? What is the stand of your own country? So these are just like some of the practical ways. And one of the last points that I would like to make is on divestment. There is a report on Don't Bank on the Bomb. There is also a global campaign called Move the Nuclear Weapons Money, where you can see examples of banks and companies who are investing in nuclear weapons. And you can check it at the website nuclearweaponsmoney.org. And you can also see some positive examples of how legislators are making divestment a priority in their countries, on the country level, on a city level, on university level, on religious institution level. So for example, to mention some of the 4 countries who adopted divestment policy is Norway, Liechtenstein, New Zealand, and Switzerland. The cities which have adopted divestment are, for example, Cambridge, Berlin, and the university level, for example, some of the German universities are divesting from nuclear weapons and fossil fuels, University of Göttingen. And this is also opportunity for young people to research and see if your universities or if your banks are investing in nuclear weapons and how you can practically stop this and change it. Thank you.
Thank you, Marjan. Plenty of ideas to take home. Thank you all for very interesting points on the engagement and working with the parliamentarians. But we do have a very short time to maybe for some questions or maybe feedback, suggestions from the audience. And I cannot see well, but there is a hand over there. Can somebody provide a microphone over here? And then on the other side.
Thank you. I'm Ilya Kursenko from the CTBTO youth group. I want to agree with what Marjan said and just want to add to the important role that CTBTO played in terms of bringing confidence to the youth, because I really think that what the youth really needs is more confidence in it. And for those who chose the field of diplomacy, this should be one of the most conservative areas that is the latest to accept the changes and innovations. My peers who work in IT, they are employed by the top companies by just showing what they can perform, though the world of diplomacy requires the specific experience and the degrees and more than that. And CTBTO has been the only organization that I've met along my way that was open for the youth to engage. And I think that the experience of the CTBTO youth group is unique for being shared with other diplomatic organizations to engage the youth directly. Thanks to the CTBTO, I participated actively in the 73rd UN General Assembly. I was entrusted little things like taking a live Facebook session of the Thai ratification of the treaty or taking a little interview at the media center. But these little things have given me a lot of confidence that I offer in my future endeavors in this field. And this was what made me join the youth group 4 years ago. And we didn't know particularly how we wanted to be because we had no places to look at. And being part of this team for 4 years has exactly engaged me directly into the things. And I think that that's what we can applaud to CTBTO for, in the leadership of Dr. Zerbo in particular, and those who supervise the youth group. They've invested a lot of their efforts and taken us as equals. That is what made such a great change for the youth. Thanks.
Thank you, yeah. I saw the other hand over there.
Okay. Good morning. My name is Christopher Cruz. I'm a Critical Issues Forum result, by the way. I did CIF in my second to last year of high school, and that's when I got acquainted with CTBTO, Dr. Zerbo, and the youth group. Since then, I've gone to travel around the world to present a project that myself, a classmate, and my teacher did called Nuclear Free Schools. Nuclear Free Schools aims to include high school students in this line of work from a grassroots activism approach. I'd love to talk about it more, but my question is for GP. I'd love to hear more about your young nuclear professionals thing. More so, what challenges have you faced in educating young people and how you have overcome them? Thank you.
Okay.
Oh, thank you. In the interest of time, maybe the first thing I should do is to invite you. We've got a summit in October, so you're welcome to attend. So probably so that we can engage more. And secondly is that I think we need to bridge the silo culture. We've got different organizations doing different things, but with the same objective. So if you're to break that, because we've got limited resources, the biggest challenge is the resources. Because no matter how good you can be, without proper resources, communication needs well-resourced sort of a drive. So I think some of these things, they need for us to come together, and I'm glad I'm here, so that we can form strategic cooperations and then move forward in such a way that we can engage more youth. So, but we can have more discussions because I don't want the timekeeper to kill me.
Thank you, JP. And thank you for your comment. I'm really happy to hear that the Critical Issues Forum that I mentioned earlier, the high school program, is inspired you to work further. And I'm sure Masaka Toki, who is in charge of that program, would be really pleased to learn that. Just on the last point is, before we close the session, I know that I couldn't, if I were not part of the CNS and the VCDNP, somebody who has the education and training at the core of its mission. I just want to, maybe for those who work in the education and training in colleges and high schools, universities, just to raise your hand in the audience. Are there? Yeah, there are a number of us here. So I think we really need to work with different groups and across different groups, but I think the role of the education and training is extremely important, as was highlighted yesterday in the panel and today panelists as well. With that, I would really like you to join me in thanking our excellent panelists and wishing them success in their future. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Let's sit down. I'll check for you. Yeah, just check my email on the copy. Any information you can talk. Thank you.
Excellent speech. I really liked it. Thank you.
Oh, I'm waiting a moment. Oh, they're going to ring a gong. Oh, wow, this is fancy. Okay, good. Room. You've been here for balls presumably before.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But that's my association.
Exactly. Well, next time we do this, we'll try and have a more relaxed setup.
Well, I know this is a...
Careful.
I'm almost tempted to start singing.
Yeah. That would be the traditional option on this stage. Oh, so we're ready to go? Hello. Hi, everyone. If you could all take your seats, that would be fantastic. My name is François Murphy. I'm the chief correspondent for Reuters here in Vienna. Some of you may have seen me sort of prowling the corridors over at the UN, especially that circular one around the board room where IAEA board meetings are held. Welcome to our panel discussion today on science communications. We have an excellent panel today, evenly split between journalists and people who speak to journalists. And we're here to discuss an issue that is really at the heart of what the CTBTO does and or should be doing. And at the very center of that is the challenge that they face, which is that the CTBTO is an organization designed to to detect nuclear tests, but actually can't call a nuclear test a nuclear test. This is one of the frustrations that journalists like me face in interacting with the CTBTO. If North Korea carries out a nuclear test, the US Geological Survey will say, North Korea has carried out a nuclear test, and then shortly after that, we'll get a message from the CTBTO saying, we have detected an unusual seismic event, which is a lot like the previous unusual seismic event that we detected in North Korea. And so, in dealing with the media, and especially in terms of gaining the world's attention and getting the attention of the media, an effective way to draw attention to what the CTBTO does is often to highlight other aspects of the IMS, for example. We've all seen, any of you who have attended previous panels during this conference have heard various stories about that, particularly the story of the ARA San Juan, the Argentinian submarine, which the CTBTO helped locate through data they had obtained. And so we're here to talk a bit about that, sort of to unpack this issue, sort of like how can you draw attention to scientific work that is being done that isn't necessarily obvious to the public, but that is often of interest to the public. And so, to discuss that, we have our panel here today. We have Yael Lavi, who is an anchor for Block TV in Israel and also a lecturer at the Interdisciplinary Center at Herzliya on media ethics. So again, something that is the heart of what we're discussing here today. To my right, to your left, we have Karen Orantes, a public information officer on the UN's social media team in New York. Karen, you manage the UN's social media presence on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and all that. And you also provide training and guidance to UN entities and member states, including the CTBTO, I believe. And to my right, even further to my right, we have James Gillies, who works on strategic planning and evaluation at CERN in Geneva, and particularly relevantly for today's conversation, you were former head of communications at CERN when the existence of the Higgs boson was proven experimentally at the Large Hadron Collider there. So first of all, I'd ask you to welcome our panelists here today. And now we're going to kick things off with a little video that touches on what I was saying at the beginning there, and then we'll open our discussion.
It will be difficult to conceal a nuclear test. If you were to do your test underground, we have all these seismic stations in the earth. If you were to explode one in the air, we have the infrasound network, which is capable of detecting sounds that we as human beings cannot hear. If you were to do a test in the oceans, we have the hydroacoustic network. We also have the radionuclide network to detect any radioactive activity. If something happens, we'll know about it very quickly. I have seen this system in action when North Korea detonated its last bomb. So my phone rang, it's really early in the morning, and my supervisor told me that we have an interesting event. Can you come to the office now and have a look at the data? On your way, it's exciting because you're thinking of what could have happened? You know, I mean, is this for real? I'm responsible for making sure that the information that is analyzed from the data that comes out from all our sensors is of the right quality when it goes to the member states. There's the excitement of having to work with this event that you're called for. At the same time, there is that reservation to say, okay, guys, is everything correct here? There's so much at stake. We have to make sure that our analysis is as accurate as possible so that when this data is passed on to the member states, they then can make the correct call. When we have done the analysis of the event, we know accurately where the event has occurred, when, and how big that event is. But then that's not the end of the story, because tomorrow I have to come back to work. Because work continues. Because whilst this event has happened, it doesn't stop any other event from occurring throughout the world. And we still have to come in and do our analysis as usual. It's such a rare opportunity to be able to say, hey, I worked on these events and I've worked for CTBTO, to ensure that the rest of the world is safe.
Okay, so you saw there, in what was quite eloquently explained, that the heart of what the CTBTO does is to pass on the data so that member states can then make that call. Can be difficult if you're me, showing up at the CTBTO and say like, whoa, what was it? And they say, well, we're going to ask the member states to make that call. But that is at the heart of what it means to be a UN or UN family organization. It's one of the constraints you have to work with, which is why I'm going to turn to Karin now. So, you work at the UN, you have to deal with the communications at the heart of the UN. So how do you work within those constraints? Is that something that really prevents effective communication, or is it more something you sort of have to work around?
There are definitely challenges to it, especially if you work for the UN and try to communicate for the UN. You've got 193 bosses. So there's definitely different interests, but what you're trying to do is communicate the core values and the mandates of the organization. And on top of that, you also run into one of our biggest issues with it, which is the UNese, that UN speak, right? The scientists in the room might relate to that. The acronyms. I mean, I've been trying to communicate about this conference for the last day, and we're at the CTBT SnT, try to explain that to people who are not currently in the room. So that is something that is definitely a challenge, and we forget about it because we're so in our bubble, we're so in our echo chamber, and of course all of us agree on these issues, but there's so many more people out there that we're trying to communicate that don't know about these issues and don't necessarily are on the same page. So we're always trying to communicate to a bigger audience, and we're always trying to keep in mind these are people that don't have the background we have, that don't have the technical expertise that we have. So we're really trying to imagine talking to a 6-year-old, or yesterday on a panel somebody said, there's an alien landing. They don't know anything. So don't assume any background knowledge, don't assume any acronym knowledge, and try to take it from there. And the other issue that we're also dealing with is that overflow of information, especially in social media. There's such a wealth of information out there. There's so much information out there. How do you keep it relevant? How do you keep it close to people's hearts, especially when you communicate technical issues that are maybe not what people think about on a daily basis? So we're trying to really boil it down to, what does the CTBT have to do with your life? Well, maybe you're less likely to die in a nuclear war because of the CTBT, So those are the things that we try to keep in mind.
I'm torn between which way to steer this, but I'm going to go up to the journalist side of the panel now, if I may, James, just bear with me. Yeah, you deal with this. Perhaps we could start with how you feel the CTBTO is perceived. Either, I'm not sure if there is a regional aspect to this, but maybe, maybe from your part of the world, how you see that, and maybe what could perhaps be done differently.
I think it's I think it's very challenging for the CTBT to get traction in the region that I live in. I'm from Israel, by the way. I'm from the Middle East. And especially in this day and age, just to call a spade, the narrative of the Middle East, especially this weekend, but the narrative of the Middle East with the current administrations running the region is not one that wants to hear the CTBT narrative. And that's something that needs to be cracked. Karen, you said something very true in that respect, and as a journalist, I also want to say how we deliver information and how we need to reach people. So in the Middle East, and sadly in Israel, the narrative is completely opposite, and it's been used actually to pump up certain administrations and get their agenda out. But to try and get to the young people, and that's one thing I think that all of us as journalists are struggling with, is to understand that their language, and you were very right in what you said, is entirely different than what we know. For the past 5 years, and not as a journalist, I'm going to speak as a lecturer for a second, I've been teaching mostly 22-year-olds. The fascinating thing about teaching 22-year-olds, and I ask the same question at the beginning of every year, how do you consume news? So first I have some news for all of you guys. Television is dead. They have not opened a television set in the past 5 years. No hand was raised when I asked that question. It is social media. It is an echo chamber. They live in echo chambers and that's the problem for us journalists, to reach and crack through those echo chambers. I think in Israel it's very prevalent. A lot of the discussion is held in social media, and the politicians have actually succeeded in what we journalists failed to do, I believe, in the last several years, and that is they reach their audience directly, and we as journalists, and that's something that is happening right now, basically report what they tweet. That's one of the main problems. So we need to crack that language and actually find a way to tell this story to the young people. I found in teaching my 22-year-olds that visualization is key. And I actually have had to rewrite the course of media ethics in the digital age, which deals predominantly, my course deals predominantly with the Iraq War, covering it and missing the point of the fact that nobody challenged the WMD notion at the beginning of that war, and showing them reportage from that time, positioning them in that situation, making them believe they are correspondents in Iraq, and putting them in a situation where they have to decide to make a certain choice on how they cover it. That incentivizes them to actually try and relate to that. Because I think one of the challenges, and you're very right in this day and age of, let's face it, it's the post-truth age. There's so much information out there. The job of the editor has eroded. Nobody knows what's true, what's not, is to try and get through to them the message that everything eventually relates to them. And that is something that I personally am still trying to figure out. How do we personalize the story, as you said, to people who say, but it's the age of the selfie, this doesn't relate to me. That's what we're trying to do at the IDC. That said, I think, when it comes to teaching people, there was a woman on stage before, and I found, and it's going to sound trivial, but I used Chernobyl in my class. I actually used the HBO series. Because I find that first-degree students, 22-year-olds, and especially in this day and age, which is sad, but we have access to every bit of information nowadays. But I have students entering my class who don't know what the Geneva Convention is, who've never heard of Chernobyl, but they do if it's on HBO. So somehow, it's bringing those stories and maybe telling our stories also as journalists, by visualizing that with a narrative that they can relate to and trends.
Also, it's interesting because we do have a very good example of a hard science story that got a lot of traction in the Higgs boson story. Now, I'm not sure that the great global public is much closer to understanding what Higgs boson is, but you, James, did manage to get a lot of traction with this story, with this issue. How did you do that? And did you do that? Did it do it by itself? Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I wish I understood how that actually happened. I'd like to think that my team had something to do with it, but it certainly wasn't all of it. Right. And it was a long story, actually. I mean, this goes back to before social media existed. We were in a different universe when we started communicating the Large Hadron Collider, and it's something that I talk about a lot, actually, because One of the things that helped us actually was a hospital technician in Hawaii who has been saying since the 1980s that particle accelerators are going to destroy the world. And in 1989, when CERN switched on its previous machine, he said that. Nobody listened at all. In 1999, there was a lab in New York, Brookhaven, that switched on a machine and was actually delayed, partly because this was beginning to get traction. There was a thing called the World Wide Web in 1999. There was not in 1989, which was actually invented at CERN, and that's another of the stories we like to tell. But it came back to bite us, because when we were switching on the LHC, there was social media too. So this echo chamber built up. And what I think is interesting there is actually the ethics of communication, the ethics of journalism. I've known a lot of journalists who've stood back from this, because it was such a big story in social media that it bubbled up into the mainstream media, which was not dead at this point. And people started paying attention to it. But in the end, it helped us. So one of the things that helped us was that people were talking about us. And then to backtrack a bit, I mean, we decided actually in 2004, the LHC is a great story. It's a fantastic story of what happens when people put aside their differences, come together to do something very noble, which is just explore the universe for the sake of just that, nothing else, actually. So we thought we're going to use this opportunity to try and build our brand a little bit. And brand, well, there's a word that using in a scientific lab, I had some kickback from that, but you can now. And we did. And so we did that. We did some market research. We actually found out a thing that surprised me, which was people like science stories. They may not understand them, but they like science stories. I thought we're going to have to sell this $10 billion project just for blue sky research on the basis of blue sky research. Not at all. People say, yes, we should do that. But they wanted to know we were spending their money responsibly. They wanted to know that there were spin-offs, hence talking about the web, hence talking about other technologies that come out of it. So we started to do that, but we were helped by the black hole story. We were helped by Dan Brown, who wrote a book that said somebody comes to CERN and steals 1/4 of a gram of antimatter, runs off to the Vatican and blows it up. Much to my surprise, our Director General allowed us to put that on our website. 2005 this was. We weren't on social media still, but the web was becoming quite important then. And we had fun with the story. So I think the message I want to get across there is that I use the word stories a lot. People like stories. All communication is about storytelling. We are storytellers, we're listeners. Communication is all about that.
We're back to the idea of something you can sell to a 60-year-old. Not that there's anything wrong. Not that 6-year-olds are unable to understanding things, but they may be behind the latest developments, for example. So yeah.
Yeah. So it was all about storytelling. It was about taking what came along. We couldn't. Well, we had a choice, I suppose. We could say that the hospital technician in Hawaii was a complete crackpot, or we could just try and engage with the story. The same with angels and demons. So we were telling stories, and we were looking at things and thinking, there is conversation about us, particularly when social media came along. People are talking about us. Mm-hmm. We thought we've got to be part of that conversation. Not only part of it, we've got to be seen as a trusted commentator on that. We've got to be seen as authoritative, and if possible, we've got to be leading the conversation about us. So those are the approaches that we took there.
So this sort of this idea of a to and fro, sort of being aware of the material you have, but then also looking for opportunities that you can use to draw more attention towards what you're doing.
And not being frightened of them either. I mean, when you introduced CERN, you said that my watch as head of comms saw the startup of the Large Hadron Collider and the discovery of the Higgs boson. You missed out that we broke the Large Hadron Collider in between those two things, just after we'd had 340 media outlets at CERN to watch us switching the machine on. So that was all covered as well, and it was it was all covered. And my take on it is that this is actually a positive thing, because it allowed us to talk about not just science. And yes, maybe it would be great if everybody understood what the Higgs boson is and why it's so important. But I think what's more important now is that people understand how science works, and that it's a process, and it's about making decisions on the basis of evidence rather than science just delivering fact after fact after fact, because that's not what it is. So it allowed us to talk about the process of our field of science, and how what a challenge it is, how you have steps forward, steps back, and slow progress in the end.
Karin, is this a process that sounds familiar to you? Is this is it a bit different? Is there a different market for sort of the UN's work in general? Would you distinguish between general UN fare and particularly scientific fare? How do you see it?
I think there are quite a lot of overlaps. I want to come back again to the storytelling that I think all of us now have mentioned, and I really, really enjoyed the sand painting in the opening ceremony, because I think that really brings it to the point. You need to get your story to a point where you can paint it in sand and people still understand it. And I think that was done really beautifully in the opening ceremony, because it's really about getting that message across. However, in the UN context, we also have that issue of, you're saying on the one hand, the science, and that we do want to get that across, but because we have so many topics to cover, and there's such a vast area of topics that we do want to cover, that people come to us with huge expectations. So, okay, you're the UN, well, why haven't you stopped all nuclear tests yet? And why haven't you solved all the crises there are? And, you know, why haven't you sent peacekeepers into this and that country? And why haven't you? So people come with these huge expectations, which is hard on the one hand, but social media allows us to do that back and forth and two-way communications. We're using social media also to listen. So we're going out there and we're looking, what are people saying about us? What are the questions they're having? What is the misinformation that's out there? And there's still people saying, oh, the UN has all the money and it's costing all my taxpayer money. So then we can say, you know what? You want to know how much you pay for the UN? Average citizen, every person pays $1.40 a year of their tax money into UN funds. So again, bringing it back to something that people can relate to and seeing what's out there and what the questions are that people are asking, trying to answer them in a way that a 6-year-old would understand them.
Yael, you were sort of talking about engaging with this sort of thing. Is that your view of how you need to do it, or do in a Trumpian world do things need to be done much more aggressively than that?
That's actually a great question. Do we use the same mechanism, or do we go around it? Personally, I do agree. I also think that one of the challenges that we are facing is telling our stories. And I know in science, and by the way, you're entirely right, people love science. It's just how to market it. But we live in the short attention span era. Mm-hmm. And the problem I think that we're facing, and that's something that we're trying to crack, is that I can grab the attention of my young audience, so they don't look at their cell phones or they're not on Facebook, for, I've noticed, 40 seconds to a minute and a half at a time, which is essentially, I know to us journalists it's very frustrating, but which is essentially the world that we're growing into.
I'm a bit worried that we're turning into like the old cranks after the youth panel, sort of saying like the thing with young people is, but okay, yeah.
No, and I only look young, but I'm actually 102. That said, I find it a challenge that I welcome, because it's the new language. I have a 5-year-old that when he was 3, he went up to the television set and went like this. And I wanted to stop him, and my husband said, don't, he's right. We're about 5 to 6 years away from that. And it's that type of language to find, I don't know, maybe at a 6-year-old or whatnot, that when they do this, they want to stay with the story. The story can't be just hard facts. I know those are important. It's how do we tell those hard facts, yes, in a minute to a minute 30, because this is how fast-paced our world is. And it's doable.
Well, James, you were saying that a lot of what we were talking about, particularly with the LHC, was not necessarily in a pre-internet age, but still in a different media landscape. Would you have done things differently if this were happening right now? Is that hard to say?
I think we probably would have done, actually. I mean, one of the things that we spent a long time thinking about is what do we do with this social media stuff? I am of the generation where I was looking for the rule book and not finding one.
We could tell when you said this social media stuff. Yeah.
I know. So we were very nervous about it. I think we would probably have jumped in sooner into that, and we would probably have engaged with the stories as well sooner. We were quite nervous at first about engaging with the story of these people who say, hang on, you're going to make a black hole that's going to swallow the planet. I think we should have engaged with them sooner. I think that's what we would have done, and on different channels. I mean, another thing that I think is important, and we have done since, again, we'd have done this sooner, is we have a global audience, and we have a global community of scientists working at CERN using the CERN facilities. There's over 100 nationalities and 13,000 scientists, all of whom talk. We can't stop them talking, so we enable them to talk. We help them. We provide them with things. We have a lot of people all over the world on social media channels, looking at our social media channels in their languages as well, and doing things there. So we're really trying to engage and get inside these bubbles where people are living increasingly these days.
So, what I think might be important to highlight as well is that while some of the rules of the game may be changing through this, what we're still all highlighting is that the fundamental structure is still the same. This idea of telling a compelling story has been the same since the dawn of print media.
I think actually go back way before print media. I think there are a couple of things that define humanity: storytelling and curiosity, right? And that plays well into people who want to communicate science. Both of those things: people who can tell stories and who want to communicate science, because we've always been curious. We've always looked at the stars, way before printing presses.
I think that might be a good point at which to give people a chance to ask questions, if there are any out there. I should add that, I think I speak for the whole panel when I say that people like us like short, snappy questions, preferably without very long introductions. But we're quite happy to carry this on amongst ourselves as well. So are there any questions out there? I see a hand going up in the darkness over there, if there's a microphone available.
Yeah, good morning. My name's Austin Short. I studied radiation physics. So this is perhaps more of a complaint to the journalists than a question.
Bring it on.
Yeah.
Nuclear power since the 1970s has saved around 2 million lives as a result of replacing fossil fuels. But it's not a story that's really been told. And I believe the media has contributed to a prejudice against nuclear power. And I think that's mostly due to not understanding the risks of radiation. Radiation is all around us. You can't escape it. We absorb it through our food, through the environment. Nobody's checked the marble in this room, but it would probably show a higher background radiation than other rooms that you might have had for a conference. So do you think this point is valid? Could you do more to understand the risks of radiation and compare it to other risks in our daily lives, perhaps?
Before we get into anything like a bun fight, I think I might turn to a non-journalist, sort of get their view on that. Either of you want to chime in on this? Perhaps?
I can comment on that. I mean, I see where you're coming from, and working in a laboratory that deals with radiation and communicates radiation all the time, I share your concerns. I also share your concern that nuclear, this is my personal opinion here, is part of a solution, actually. So that we, not just journalists, but society, should be doing a better job of doing that, of communicating risk. Unfortunately, I think one of the things that humans are not so good at is understanding risk. And there's two stories I'd like to tell here about dealing with journalists. One was a journalist on the BBC who was talking to a scientist about the incidence of a particular kind of illness had gone up by 100% in a year, from 1 case in a bazillion to 2 cases in a bazillion, and the journalist just kept banging on about the percent and shouldn't we all be worried, and the poor scientist was not able to get the message across. But the other was a journalist writing in The Guardian who, after Fukushima, wrote an article saying how Fukushima maybe stop worrying and embrace nuclear. So not all journalists are doing this, and it's George Monbiot, and he's still been continuing in the same line afterwards. But I think it's not something that you can pin on journalists. I think it's something you have to pin on all of us, actually, who have a stake in this. Yeah.
Thank you for that very reasonable point. Yael, would you like to care to wade in on this one?
Can we tell more stories? Of course. We have to remember, and I'm saying this in the age where my profession has become public enemy number one in various places, that, look, media is also a business, sadly. Everything is also a business. And we don't operate in a vacuum. And if I had my fill, I would just go be an independent journalist and write everything that I want, but I need a platform to put it on. So ultimately, I think right now in many media businesses that are either have an agenda or agenda-based, and let's face it, most media outlets nowadays do and don't even hide it, we need to try and beat the system within the system. Yes, they should. We also should be telling many, many other stories and not just reporting what is on social media and utilizing social media to inform people. I want to be optimistic, though. I think we're in a transformation age. I think that we are just learning the process now. I even think that social media is transforming, and people ultimately will try and seek more things that relate to them. Can we do more? Of course. Can the people of the world do more? Of course. But I think it's about trying to do that individually. Personally, as a journalist, I know that back in the day when I worked for ABC News during the Iraq War, and I was very young, one thing that bothered me was that there was such a drum roll leading up to that war that nobody questioned an intelligence report. And we all know what happened after that. I don't think that would have happened today. I think we have enough independent voices online. The question is, do they get enough of a stage? So we're trying to do more. We're trying to beat the system within the system, and we also need the help of everybody around us.
If I may add my 2 cents on this.
Please.
This is actually a very complicated question, and I think it helps to sort of always look at analogous issues and how, you know, to be able to compare and contrast them. One thing that a lot of us have spent a lot of time on lately, at least in Europe, is Brexit. If you were, say, unhappy with the outcome of the Brexit referendum, to what extent were the politicians to blame, and to what extent was the media to blame? You know, everyone's going to have their own opinion on that, but I don't think that anyone would roundly blame one or the other. And then on nuclear issues, you also have to throw human nature into the mix. At the risk of sounding a little cynical, Hiroshima, Chernobyl, all these things are, sorry, my mind's gone blank. Fukushima is the word I was looking for. These are simply better, more gripping stories than any optimistic analysis, even as clear-sighted as it may be, about what energy sources would be best for the planet. And if you also add to that the fact that, I mean, we all see that, particularly on the issue of global warming, climate change, there hasn't, well, in many countries at least, people haven't been able to capture the public imagination with that. These are all aspects of the same problem, and I'm not suggesting for a minute that the media aren't part of that equation, but to suggest that they're somehow the primary culprits, I think is questionable, at least. I'll go back to moderating now. Any more questions out there? I see a couple of raised hands. Yes, please. Or sorry, is the gentleman who asked the question, did you want to come back on that, or is there, no? Okay, all right, so please, over here.
I thought it was fascinating that the gentleman had a question about the prejudice of journalists. Do you have any suggestions for the scientists in here, how they can tell their story?
Oh, that's very kind.
Personalize every story. Yes,
we've had discussions about this before holding this panel event, and mine would be even more basic. Is simply just please speak plain English, and test it on your family or your friends or someone who isn't part of your world to see if it might fly. Because journalists, for all our faults, we're normally decently informed people, and if we don't get it, there's a good chance that most other people don't.
And I would actually not only say test it on your family and friends, test it on your kids. Again, the 6-year-old is, especially for social media where you really have very limited attention span, if your 6-year-old gets it, then tweet it.
Most journalists know a little more than your average 6-year-old, but again, we're talking about averages maybe, yes. I can't see where the microphone is, but I see there are some questions, yes. Anyone else who's microphone? Mr. Microphone, please take your pick.
Thank you. I'm Ilya from the CTBTO youth group. I was a young member of the New York Academy of Sciences for a couple of years, and we really focused on communicating science there. And I admit that nowadays almost anyone with a camera can become a politician, a scientist, an expert in any field, though their competence might be, deluding and doubtful, though they win over the minds, and the scientists with a lot of expertise remain, out of attention. I would bring the example of the New York Academy of Sciences as a very successful one in making science transparent and accessible for all. They do take over the social media a lot and encourage a lot of young people to become the science advocates. Would you name any other examples of successful communication of science that would win over these experts with cameras?
Anyone care to weigh in on that?
I believe there's actually a Facebook group, I'm serious, called I bleep 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 love science. It does amazing work. I mean, it's as simple as that. It does little tells, almost like AJ+. It has grabbed many young children I know. I use it as a guide almost when I edit visuals for my students as to how to, by the way, you almost don't need a storyteller in it, just the visuals and the text. I strongly recommend people look at it. It's a language that works. It's that simple. It really, really does. It has a huge following. It's even picked up by mainstream media outlets sometimes as little tells to finish up broadcasts. But that's essentially the language. And I know it's hard for us. It's not an old generation. It's such a fast transforming world. And you're right, and basically communicating is storytelling, and the tools only changed. So all of us need to make that effort together and understand and look at these formats that seem to work, because I bleep, bleep, bleep love science has been on for, I think, at least 6 years. Yeah. And it's crossed a platform of generations, and it's something that people consume. That's the language that I try to use with complicated stories such as the Middle East, which is almost as complicated, if not more, than science.
It's actually a good point that this is almost a structural weakness of the news media, at least, which I'm at the sharp end, is that we tend to always be on the lookout for something new, as in a story that has never been told before, or something that pushes back the boundaries of human knowledge. But if you look at what really works with the public, it's often stuff that has been known for quite a while, but is just told in a compelling way. And that is a niche for a lot of these things. A lot of these memes or whatever, they're not necessarily new, but if it's just fascinating, then then it will get the public.
It will grab, and it's to quote Woody Allen, it's the worst place to do it. But there are no new stories. There are only new ways of telling them. And in this day and age, we're all trying to break news, which I think is almost impossible because everybody's everywhere all the time. So it's just getting the attention, not with an exclusive, but with a really good form of storytelling.
So yes, you've been waiting to ask a question for a while, sorry.
My name is Murenzi. I'm the Executive Director of TWAS, the World Academy of Science, for advancing science in the developing world. So the issue of communicating science is very important because the divide that we had between the North and the South is a knowledge and technological and science divide. This means that how do government in the developing world would invest in science? How can scientists in the developing world in particular communicate their science to the policymakers? So this is something that is very important. So we've been discussing at the Academy, how do we help the scientists in the developing world communicate their science? Mm-hmm. So communication in itself is a science. The way you communicate, it's not just go there and try it in your kid and things like that. You need some skills to be able to do that. I'm a mathematical physicist. I can do formula, but communicating the formula to somebody else requires some skills. Mm-hmm. So my question is that will it be possible to have a layman course on communication in science, like on Coursera, for example? Something that will be the ABCD. On Coursera, for example, on this website where you can go there and start from ABC and do that. Is it possible to do that? That's my question.
Well, I'm sure it is. So, James, you look like you...
There's a number of challenges. One is the pure communicating of science, and that exists. I mean, there are courses for scientists on how to communicate their science, how to adapt their language to be appropriate to their audiences. But what's different and something that I'm certainly very conscious of working at CERN, where we have to communicate all around the world, is that there are only certain communication landscapes and infrastructures that I understand. Right. And I probably don't, I understand the communication infrastructures in Europe and in America and to a certain extent in Japan, where there's a highly developed particle physics infrastructure there. But in a lot of the world, I just don't. So what I would do and have done is try to find people who do understand that and who are communicators in science in those countries, and then we work with them and entrust them to do it on our behalf. So yeah, so the answer is only a partial one. Courses in how to communicate science, yes, that certainly exists, and that we can certainly point you towards. But understanding how to fit that into your communication landscape in your countries, I don't know that myself.
If I may, it's a little bit of how we try to do communications at the UN as well. So we've got our substantive experts, who might be the technical experts and the scientists or the political experts. And then we've got communication liaison focal points, people in those departments that know the subject matter. They might not be the experts, but they understand it enough to help the experts communicate what it is that they try to come across. And then you've got the regional experts that know, okay, so if we want to get this message across in this and that region, this is the platform, this is a social media channel, this is how we best do it. And I think social media can help in that way, as it's a very democratic channel and very open in certain areas and relatively accessible in areas where other media are not so accessible.
Does that answer your question?
There is just one more comment.
Oh,
there is a network which you're probably aware of, SciDevNet, scidev.net, which is a network of science communication just trying to solve that problem, actually. So you might want to look at them if you don't. I'm sure you know them already, but
okay.
Yeah.
Thanks. Well, we could go on, but it's 11 o'clock and there's a coffee break, and we can't compete with a coffee break. So, well, I enjoyed that. And I hope you all did too. So thanks, everyone. It was a fun discussion. Thank you.
plans, so I don't know. Yeah. Ah, it's on. Und auch für dich. Ja. Ja. Okay, 35. Okay, good morning, everyone, or good afternoon already. I am Angela Kane. I wanted to welcome you here for this session, which I think is extremely interesting, and I'm very happy that it was put on by the CTBTO. It deals, as you know, with the Sustainable Development Goals, and we have a really very excellent lineup of wonderful participants, whom I will introduce in a minute. And what we will do, the structure of the session, I just wanted to tell you, is we will have about 45 minutes to hear from our high-level participants who are here on the podium with us, and that will be followed by some question and answers, including from you, the audience. And after that, we will have a presentation by the SDG Challenge winners, and there are 6 of them, and they will make each a presentation and from the talking point here, and then you also have a possibility to ask them any questions that you'd like. But let me just say a couple of words about the SDGs. Everyone has heard about the SDGs, but I think few people really know how they came about and what is behind them. And I think you also remember the Millennium Development Goals. But the SDGs are a universal set of goals, targets, and indicators that the member states of the UN are using to frame their agendas and political policies over the next 12 years, or 11 years really, until 2030. They were already approved in 2015, and they have 17 goals, and they have 169 targets. But this basically goes back to 2012, to the Rio +20 conference that was held at the time when they were established. And the United Nations began implementation of the 2030 Agenda in 2016, and it's a very ambitious time frame to conclude this in 14 years. But what is important about them, and this is what we will also focus on, is that the indicators that were set as the first time to monitor progress towards the SDGs, and at all levels, local, national, regional, and the global levels. Now, how many indicators are there? There are 232 of them. So I think that's quite a large number for 17 goals. And again, what is important is that you can actually measure progress. And I don't know if any of you remember or know the late management guru. His name was Peter Drucker. And he said, if you can't measure it, you can't improve it. And also he said, what gets measured gets managed. And I think that's very good. The CTBTO, of course, can enhance significantly the implementation of several goals. And there are basically 3 levels. One is the normative work, one is the operational work, and one is the technical work. And as I said, we have 3 excellent panelists here, and I will introduce them in the order in which they will present their statements. And the first one I have is Ambassador Abel Ayoko, who is here to my right. To your side, it's the left. And he is the Undersecretary of the Directorate of Regions and International Organizations at the Nigerian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. He's had a long and very distinguished career as a diplomat, and was also, and I should mention this, stationed here as ambassador and permanent representative of Nigeria to Austria and the international organizations. And he chaired the CTBTO PrepCom and Working Group B, and also served as a member of the Board of Governors of the IAEA. I will introduce the second participant when she's speaking, but let me now turn to Ambassador Ayoko. You have the floor.
Thank you, Angela. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, as a diplomat, I will approach my presentation from the possible challenges to the attainment of the SDGs, and what role the CTBTO can and should play to ameliorate some of the challenges. Let me thank Dr. Zebo and his team for inviting me today. In my opinion, there are 3 major factors which might slow down the attainment of SDGs. These are the political will of leaders. 2, disasters could be natural and man-made. And 3, global peace and security. With regard to political will, history was made in December 2015 when more than 190 world leaders endorsed and committed themselves to the attainment of the 17 goals in 15 years. It was one of the highest exhibitions of political will. The international community is therefore more than ever before poised with the political will and determination towards the attainment of the SDG. On the other hand, disasters have a more complex and multi-dimensional impact on the attainment of SDG. It could either be natural or man-made, both of which have the potential to disturb the attainment of the goals. Man-made disasters are generated by human action resulting in catastrophes like wars and effect of it, atomic bomb detonation and effect of it. The UN Office of Disaster Risk Reduction recently warned of the increasing complex risks posed to threaten global economies and the attainment of SDGs. These potential natural risks include climate change, air pollution, biological hazard, drought, flooding, tsunamis, cyclone, and earthquakes. The report called on government to adopt adequate strategies to manage these risks, including requests for the implementation of the SnT framework to strengthen disaster risk governance and enhance disaster preparedness. However, most developing countries cannot afford to manage disasters even when they are aware of the impending disasters. Development can only strive under the atmosphere of peace and security. Global peace and security is therefore a panacea for the attainment of the SDGs. Now, what are the links between CTBTO and the attainment of the SDGs? Let me lay the emphasis on the nexus between peace and security and development. Although this nexus is still being debated in some circles, however, for me, whatever way we look at it, regrettably, man-made activities often jeopardize peace and security with the attendant negative effect on social development. The world has never since the Second World War been drafted so close to the thrill of the Third World War and detonation of atomic bomb than now. Bilateral and multilateral negotiations are failing, while unilateral efforts have indeed created a temple of war rather than peace. We are all aware of the no-deal outcome of the Hanoi summit between North Korea and United States, which last month culminated in the breach of the self-imposed moratorium of missile tests by the former. There are drums of war between Iran and the USA because of the latest withdrawal from the JCPOA. As a matter of fact, the change of heart from President Trump a few days ago changed the drums of war. The broil between India and Pakistan in March 2019 almost led to war. Both nuclear nations still continue to be suspicious of each other over Kashmir. NPT negotiations is almost stalled. The USA, the Russian Federation, and China are more than ever before suspicious of each other. No doubt, the nuclear arms race is here. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the CTBTO remains now the only peace-building bloc for global peace and security. The tenacity and the green persistence engagement of Executive Secretary Dr. Zebo and his team at the PrepCom in this regard has been extraordinary. The signing and the ratification of CTBTO by 184 countries, including the latest ratification by Zimbabwe on the 13th February 2029, attest to the doggedness of the team to ensure that nuclear tests is banned all over the world. The CTBTO verification technologies have continued to serve an important confidence-building measures that enhances regional and global peace and security, thus contributing to a safe environment for sustainable development, a pivotal key to the attainment of the 17 goals. By the same token, global role and mandate of CTBTO and Preparatory Commission have impetus for the international community to freeze huge resources running into trillions of dollars from the pursuit of nuclear bomb technologies to to social development agendas, including the SDG. Research indicated that nations during the arms race diverted whole resources running to billions of dollars from social development to the pursuit of nuclear-bound technologies. Of course, there has been some debate on this, which might come into later. The CTBTO International Monitoring System, IMS, through its 4 wave technologies, seismic, hydrochloric, infrasound, and radionuclic, have continued to play a very huge role on the early warning systems to prepare threats posed by tsunamis, volcanic eruptions, monsoons, and cyclones. This has been of tremendous assistance to farmers, particularly in developing countries, thereby assisting in the achievement of goals 1 and 2, no poverty and 0 hunger. CTBTO is currently in partnership with UNESCO to enhance cooperation for the benefit of tsunami early warning system and capacity building in developing countries. The CTBT is by its mandate to ban nuclear tests has contributed to the action against climate change, that is goal 13, climate action, by its impact. A visit to any of the nuclear test ground that took place 50 years ago would realize that it has been almost impossible, to revive those lands 50 years after. That's devastating effect of the atomic bomb due to the effect of nuclear pollution. Through the elimination of underwater nuclear tests, the CTBTO has contributed to the elimination of radioactive in the ocean, thereby conserve the use of ocean, sea, and marine resources for sustainable development. Only last month, scientists' research discovered elevated levels of radioactive carbon in amphipods in the Pacific Ocean. These amphipods were infused by eating the remains of animals that were exposed to radioactive fallout from the Cold War nuclear test. The ban on underwater nuclear tests has indeed stopped further pollution of the sea. The IMS data is used for monitoring marine life, whale migration, and drift of large iceberg. Goal 14, life underwater. Finally, CTBTO is a member of UN Interagency Committee on Radiological and Nuclear Emergencies. Goal 17, partnership for the achievement of the goals. The necessity to see CTBTO enter into force should continue to be a priority. Collaboration should be expanded to include research institutions, universities, and regional organizations for more visibility of the activities of the CTBTO. There's no doubt that the stations have performed better than it was originally intended, and such performance should be utilized for the benefit of mankind. 184 signatories and 169 ratification by CTBTO is significant and a confident building, as well as commitment on the part of these countries to spread all over the regions of the world, never to embark on nuclear tests. The moratorium has continued to be observed, except for one country. It is both moral and legal obligations. This alone has the potential to enhance international peace and development. Ratification or no ratification, CTBTO and PTS have meritoriously justified its 22 years of existence. Finally, the future we want is a world free from nuclear tests. Utilizing CTBTO available resources to assist humanity, manage natural and man-made disasters, and enhance human lives. I say yes to nuclear security, yes to non-proliferation, no to nuclear bomb. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Yoko, for this excellent overview and also for listing some of the goals, the SDGs, where CTBTO can make an important impact. I wanted to now turn to Professor Ana Maria Cheto. She is a research professor at the Institute for Physics and a lecturer at the Faculty of Sciences in Mexico. but she's also an advisor to the Undersecretary for Multilateral Affairs for Science and Diplomacy of the Mexican government. And she was involved, I must say, in 2 already Nobel Peace Prize awards, one with Pugwash in *95, and then the IAEA in 2005. And when I read her bio, I must share with you that I was highly impressed because she's written 14 books and 115 research articles. And now she's giving us a presentation, which I believe is a PowerPoint presentation. Ana Maria, you have the floor. Professor Cheto.
Thank you very much, Angela. Distinguished audience, good morning still. I would like to start by sincerely thanking Dr. Serbo for his kind invitation to take part in this conference, and also to his team for their very efficient support in organizing this extraordinary event. I feel honored to be moderated by Angela Kane and to be accompanied by 2 distinguished ambassadors, Ambassador from Denmark, whom I know from my IAEA times, and Ambassador Ayoko. Well, yes, as a scientist, I have not prepared a text to read out, but I have prepared a PowerPoint. I hope you don't mind. And this time, I will not speak of nuclear non-proliferation, of which I have been for many years an active advocate, because I thought this conference is a timely opportunity to draw your attention to the topic, which is increasing in relevance, the topic of geoengineering. So engineering is defined as the intentional manipulation of the climate system aimed to counteract global climate change. There is already a lot of information on geoengineering on the website. You can look it up. I would have no time to go into the details. But I would like to say a few words about it to set the frame. Basically, the rationale is that because of climate change, a high percentage of our flora and fauna are in danger of becoming extinct. And by 2050, which is already around the corner, and although for some, climate change is still under debate, something that is very clear because there are data on it is that global warming is developing at an accelerated pace. So there are, as I say, there are many options to avoiding this outcome. And some of them are already being considered more seriously. Basically, there are 2 plans, which are called Plan A, which is basically about mitigation and adaptation strategies, like rapid reduction of greenhouse gases through energy efficiency strategies and renewable energy development, and Plan B, which is quite different from Plan A, which is what we can briefly call the technological fix. So, and this is where the geoengineering comes in. There are basically 3 different strategies nowadays, geoengineering strategies, which are mentioned here, and you can find out much more through the internet, which are the solar radiation management, basically to avoid receiving as much solar radiation as we are receiving today. The second one is the carbon dioxide removal. There are several technologies that are being envisioned for that. And the third one is Earth radiation management by allowing more heat to escape into the space, which is somehow let's say, the complement or the opposite of the solar radiation management, which is to reflect sunlight so that it doesn't come into the surface. What is the status of geoengineering today? Well, it is moving forward slowly. There is political support for it, for both carbon dioxide reduction and solar radiation management, and it's growing. In particular, in some countries, some high emission and oil producing countries. And there is also research being carried out with both public and private subsidy. And also there is the experimentation, outdoor experimentation is starting in pilot projects. And that's what I would like to draw your attention to. Because to evaluate the viability of these techniques, it is necessary to carry out on-site experiments. So the experimentation phase is already starting. And I will give you an example of the first steps foreseen. There is a big solar radiation management project that is spearheaded by a research group at Harvard. And there are a number of groups that justify small-scale experiments, although their usefulness is questioned. And what is important, and many both non-governmental organizations and also some, government instances are stressing that these experiments should be first assessed via Earth system models, because local experiments can have both local but also more global consequences. So, what is the linkage between this geoengineering that is already starting and it's possible and the SDGs? Well, the geoengineering is, as I said at the beginning, aimed to counteract global change, but it also has its risks and possibly negative impacts, and they have to be seriously taken into account. And all these, the assumed benefits and also the possible risks, have to do with a number of SDGs. I put there those that would be most directly affected on the first line, and those that would be indirectly affected on the second line. So this array of risks and impacts are very clearly related to the SDGs, and one would have to take them into account also in the development of in the measurement of the 232 indicators. That an example of what I said, that the local experiments may have global consequences or local interventions, is illustrated by this couple of graphs, which are the result of prediction by simulation, because the experiments have not been carried out, not yet. So this is a simulation, which today is a very powerful tool to already find from a systems approach what can happen on a global scale when you have a local, as a result of a local intervention. And there you can see that indeed there are global consequences. The red and blue areas attest to this. So what is the role of the United Nations and its bodies? Well, obviously, the next steps before further development of geoengineering experiments are related to building global governance and the governance structures, for several reasons. One, to ensure a proper decision-making process about these new strategies. Second, to take care of the integrity of life on Earth. And third, to guarantee the social equity of the conditions of all geoengineering deployments, if there ever are any. So, and this is why it is important to take a multilateral approach to the subject, as I say in this graph. So it's the simplest, of course, and most effective approach to governments is of geoengineering is to adopt and extend the existing moratoria, because there are already agreements and treaties that in one way or another have to do with geoengineering. So there is already a basis on which one can build. And based on this international environmental law, and I would like to mention in particular the CBD, the Convention on Biological Diversity, in fact, some governments and also some non-governmental organizations, those that have pushed for a greater geoengineering oversight, could move towards a United Nations level ban. And that is where strengthening the link with CTBT and the CTBTO in conjunction with the 2030 agenda should be mentioned. Because of what has been said, CTBTO in its 20 years of experience has done a lot of normative work, operational work, and technical work, and the three of them are necessary in this case. We think that so this is what is mentioned here. The experience not only of having a test ban treaty, but the whole history that led to the test ban treaty is very relevant for this case, because we are in a similar situation regarding the geoengineering experience, and we could very much learn from the process that led to the test ban treaty and from the management of the treaty itself. So we think timely action is required. In the case of geoengineering, the mistakes that we know of, we are very much aware in this conference that led to the test ban treaty, the nuclear test ban treaty, should be avoided in the case of experiences with geoengineering. And before deploying, at least a precautionary approach should be taken. The role of the CTBTO in particular is also highly relevant because of its unique infrastructure, both based on the international monitoring system and the international data center. And of course, the infrastructure that several countries have developed are a valuable complement to this and should also be taken into account to develop an early warning system that could be very much benefit from the infrastructure in countries and the central infrastructure here in Vienna. So this would be the main points of my message. I would like to go back to what I said at the beginnings. There are two options: Plan A, which is mitigation and adaptation strategies, and Plan B, which is this technological fix, which has to be looked at very carefully. And I think the CTBT and CTBTO have a very important role to play in this. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Chapter, for this extremely interesting explanation. I find it really very interesting that both of you already very much mentioned climate change, and I'll come back to that in your questions afterwards. But now I have the great pleasure to give the floor to Ambassador John Bernhardt. He is from Denmark. He had a long career and very distinguished career in the diplomatic service of Denmark. He was here in Vienna, ambassador to the OSCE, the IEA, and the CTBTO. So you see already this breadth of experience that every one of the panelists is bringing to this. But he was also ambassador to the OPCW in The Hague and served in Spain and Venezuela. and he's currently working as an independent advisor on international political and legal issues, and particularly on nuclear security. So, Ambassador Bernhard, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Angela. Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, friends, there are fortunately already many links between the Agenda for Sustainable Development and the CTBTO. But I'll mention a few areas where links might be further strengthened. The mandate and activities of the CTBTO have obvious links to many parts of the Sustainable Development Goals. One of the CTBTO's fundamental tasks is to promote and secure peace, and the treaty is recognized as one of the world's most important non-proliferation and disarmament instruments. But its influence should be spent on poverty reduction, and economic development are not spent on weapons, as, for example, more nuclear weapons. CTBTO's work clearly also contributes to this. In this connection, it is relevant to mention the adoption by the UN General Assembly in 2017 of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, after many years of discussions about the possibility of a general ban on nuclear weapons. The treaty will enter into force when 50 states have ratified it. So far, 70 states have signed, but only 23 states have ratified. So it is still rather far from entering into force. Opinions are divided on its practical significance and its benefits, even if it enters into force. But in any case, the adoption of the treaty was a major event politically and diplomatically, and it will of course be brought into future discussions on nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation. It is important to note that the treaty's preamble expressly recognizes the vital importance of the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty and its verification regime as a core element of the nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation regime. A statement which, of course, is fully valid also independently of the new treaty. Economic growth, work, and well-being for all are just a few of the Sustainable Development Goals, which depend on sufficient resources, not least energy resources. Today, more than half of the world's electricity production comes from sources like oil, coal, and gas, which, by their emission of CO2, are responsible for a considerable part of the climate change problem. So how will it be possible to support and promote the necessary economic growth foreseen in the SDGs without causing even bigger climate problems by continuing to use energy sources which lead to more emission of CO2? Here it must be recalled that one of the Sustainable Development Goals is also to take urgent action to combat climate change. And there's no doubt that protection of the climate is and will remain very high on the international political agenda. Therefore, it's absolutely essential to avoid a situation where we would have to choose between strongly needed economic and social development on one side and protection of the climate on the other side. Both are top priorities. Even if it will be difficult and also costly, there are actually ways to establish a reasonable balance between these two highly important goals. A partial solution can be to cover as much of the demand as possible by increased use of renewable energy like wind and sun. However, in a foreseeable future, renewable energy sources cannot be expected to produce enough energy to facilitate the significant economic growth which is needed at the global level for an increasing population. Therefore, more countries will probably have to consider basing themselves on an energy mix which includes a certain amount of nuclear energy. An energy source which is clean, that is CO2 free, and also efficient, especially for countries in need of strong industrial development. It is well known that in a number of countries, including my own Denmark, there is skepticism both in the public and among decision makers towards the use of nuclear power, because undeniably it entails certain risks with regard to proliferation, development of nuclear weapons and security. Therefore, it is imperative that there is a well-founded public trust and confidence in the measures which apply to the use of nuclear energy and which aim at minimizing such risks. This is both a question of effective domestic standards and measures and of trustworthy international review and control mechanisms. And this is where the CTBTO's verification regime and the IAEA's safeguards can provide the crucial international guarantee against any increased risk of proliferation or development of nuclear arms, which might result from more nuclear activities around the world, maybe in particular in nuclear newcomer states, which are sometimes located in politically unstable regions. Without maintaining and supporting the high standard and credibility of the work of these two universal nuclear watchdogs, it will be much more difficult to allow nuclear energy to have the important influence on both economic and social development and climate which it is capable of offering. In other words, the more nuclear activities the world will experience, and I think a growth in this direction is to be expected, the more important is the role of the CTBTO's verification regime. To conclude, I think the links between the work of the CTBTO and the achievement of many of the Sustainable Development Goals should be made more visible and should be strengthened inter alia through cooperation and discussions or partnerships with a variety of stakeholders, like other relevant international organizations in or outside the UN family, civil society, including NGOs, academic fora and think tanks, as well as the private sector. Last but certainly not least, it goes without saying that the entry into force of the treaty must remain a top priority, which we should all strongly support and promote. This would, of course, strengthen even more the positive influence of the CTBTO on the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. I would like to end by underlining that the efforts of the youth group with regard to the entry into force are extremely valuable and important, and so is an ambitious and continuous media strategy. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Bernhardt. That was a very good presentation. And again, you also, as the third person on this panel, mentioned climate change. I find that very interesting. I think if we'd been talking about CTBTO maybe 5 or 6 years ago, we would not have stressed it so much. But if you read the Austrian papers this morning, they said the month of June is the hottest ever recorded so far in this country. So there we have climate change very visible. Now, when it comes to the SDGs, my first question had really been which ones can be directly affected, but all of you have already addressed this. So I'm going to drop that because you've been very specific also in the way that you have mentioned this. I wanted to ask you, because you also have spoken about the United Nations and the multilateral approach and the importance of a treaty-based approach. And of course, now that the treaties and the multilateral approach are very much put in question in recent months and maybe the last 2 years, particularly because of the actions of some world leaders, I wonder what can be done within the CTBTO context to maintain the treaty-based approach and also the multilateral strengthening that we already have. And maybe I can go in the same order. Maybe Ambassador Ayuko, you can go first. Very briefly, I'm sorry, I'm going to put a little constraint on you because we want to save enough time also for the youth participants who are making their presentations. And thank you, Ambassador Bernhardt, for also mentioning the important role that they're playing.
Thank you. Thank you, Angela. I think that, excuse me, I think that CTBTO should continue to receive the support we've already given to that organization. And I believe that the PrepCom is doing a lot. The engagement of Dr. Zebo and his team to different world leaders, including North Korea, has been very, very tremendous. I think he should continue that role of engaging everybody, those who have ratified, those who are yet to ratify. The engagement is very, very important. And I believe that with the number of ratifications we have and the doggedness of Dr. Zebo and his team, and of course, the support of every member that is here, including the youth, I think we'll get somewhere. Somehow, one day, that the CTBT will be ratified. Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe I can ask a different question to Professor Chetto. And you talked a lot about the geoengineering and the various areas in which this is affected. And my question is really, who could the CTBTO partner with to make more impact in this area? I mean, what would be the natural partners that they could engage with to have more of an impact?
Yes, well, I think CTBTO has already important partners in member states. Those who are taking a more active part in CTBTO, I think, are the best ones to continue working with it. But one has to take into account, and also trying to give at least a partial response to the previous question. On one hand, well, we have, of course, still and unfortunately even more now, the nuclear menace, and the CTBTO has, of course, a very relevant role to play. But the fact that there is now an effort to link with the SDGs, I think, can strengthen also CTBTO's role in multilateralism, because there are so many issues related to the SDGs that are of great concern, not only to governments, but also to civil society. So I think that that linkage would bring high benefits both to CTBT and CTBTO and to the SDG environment. So that's where I see also geoengineering come in. It's not something isolated. It has to do with the SDGs, and I would look at it in that perspective, not as in isolation. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And I have a question to Ambassador Bernhardt, and that is, you know the SDGs are being reviewed by a so-called high-level political forum to sort of measure the progress, to see how it's gone. And I just wonder if you see that there's a possibility for this high-level forum on the SDGs could work with the Article 14 conference, for example, to sort of achieve a positive outcome and also to achieve possibly an entry into force.
Yes, I think actually that seen in a broader perspective, the problem of the entry or not entry into force of the treaty is a well-known problem in international political and legal affairs. And especially when it comes to a sensitive area, which by many countries is seen, the nuclear testing, the nuclear security areas, as we have seen also in the Nuclear Security Conference, is seen as the very nucleus of national sovereignty. And of course, every time you enter into an international agreement, you actually give away a little bit of your national sovereignty. And that seems in many cases a big step or a too big step for some countries. And the more it has to do with national security, the more difficult it is. I think it sounds very simple, but it is necessary to go on convincing states that, okay, you give away some small part of your sovereignty by entering into an international agreement, but in return, other states do the same, which leads to benefits both to yourself and to the international community as such. It is a give and take situation. It's not just a loss of sovereignty. And I think, and I hope this will be a way that at least some of the countries which have not ratified will look at the situation.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. I know there are plenty more questions, but in the interest of time, I'm going to have to curtail the questions now, so I'd like to ask you to give a big hand to our three excellent panelists. And as announced, we now have the great pleasure to listen to our youth group members. There are 6 presentations, there are 6 projects. And the first one is on layering IMS data and crowdsourcing platforms to improve crisis response and climate change monitoring. And this project will be introduced by Ms. Jessica Margolis and Mr. Raymond Wong. And I would like to invite them to come up to the podium, please.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Ms. Kane, for the introduction, and thank you to the conference organizers for inviting us here. The rich array of scientific information that the CTBTO offers to the global community makes it an incredible resource and tool for member states working towards the Sustainable Development Goals. The SDG Innovation Challenge prompted us to brainstorm new ways that the CTBTO and its data might advance the SDGs. Specifically, we wondered how we could increase the profile and impact of IMS data to improve existing systems. To summarize, our project explores how to create a platform that overlays technical data on climate change monitoring with social media platforms that include crisis and emergency response programs. The goal is to integrate data that tracks climate change with individuals' personal experiences with extreme weather events. We propose that this integrated platform can put a face to climate change in order to better capture the cumulative impact and contribute to emergency response to natural disasters. This project reinforces many of the targets and indicators of SDG 13, climate action. Target 13.1 of this SDG is to strengthen resilience and adaptive capacity to climate-related disasters. It is measured by indicators that track the number of deaths and injuries caused by natural disasters and the number of countries that adopt and implement disaster risk reduction strategies. Relatedly, Target 13.2 promotes focusing on climate change measures in national policy and planning. By encouraging CTBTO members to cooperate with social media platforms, especially those that relate to emergency response, like Twitter alerts, our program will foster collaboration between the government and technology sectors. It will also provide member states with a way to integrate different types of information in order to see a more holistic view of climate-related disasters. This will inform how states consider climate change in their national policy and planning, hopefully enhancing the effectiveness of state responses to natural disasters exacerbated by climate change. More successful state policy and planning should lower deaths and injuries and allow states to be more resilient and adaptive to climate events as they change. These benefits should bring us closer to achieving the aforementioned policy planning and adaptive indicators for SDG 13. To mention a few other metrics of SDG 13, Indicator 13.3 focuses on building knowledge and capacity to meet climate change and specifically promotes education on climate change adaptation, mitigation, early warning in school curricula. Similarly, 13.B promotes raising capacity for planning and management, with an emphasis on doing so for marginalized communities and the least developed countries. Our platform could serve as a new resource to expand perspective and capacity on climate change, and could be utilized by any member state, including least developed nations, who may not have the resources to track climate change and natural disasters themselves. By putting a face to climate change, we hope to enable the public to better understand the toll of natural disasters on the ground, how they affect individuals, and how the scale, location, or frequency of natural disasters has changed. This has the potential to be an invaluable teaching tool to spread education and awareness of SDG 13. We also explore further potential uses of IMS data that can fill technical gaps in national monitoring capabilities, especially those of developing countries, which achieves the SDG goal of capacity building. In short, our proposal aims to magnify the impact of CTBTO data in 3 ways: by encouraging national partners to explore connections and cooperation with social media, creating a new platform that puts a face to technical climate change data, and exploring further potential uses of IMS data. These objectives will hopefully expand the capacity of member states to monitor climate change, adopt emergency response planning, and ultimately achieve the targets of SDG 13. To learn more, please see our presentation at 2:30 on Thursday in the forum room. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jessica. I should have mentioned that she is an incoming master's candidate at Georgetown University in Washington, D.C., and has previously also interned at the CTBTO. The next presentation is going to be on hydroacoustic signatures petition for social change, and this will be introduced by Ms. Jovita Karching Ho. She studied physics at Middlebury College in the United States and is a UNICEF climate ambassador. So please come up.
Good morning, everyone. I'm honored to be in this distinguished presence, and I want to thank the CTBTO for inviting me to speak. Today, I want to talk a little bit about the hydroacoustics network of the IMS, and my presentation will be on Thursday morning if you would like to learn more. Mainly focused on the benefits of my project to the CTBTO. But before I start, I want to share a little bit about my home. Growing up in Hong Kong, and more specifically on one of its outlying islands, the ocean always stood between me and wherever I wanted to go. Crossing the ocean on such a frequent basis often reminds me of the intricate interdependence between the oceans and us. But 1,000 meters where hydrophones are employed, the deep ocean is a world characterized by acoustic stability, but largely mysterious to the rest of us. So why is hydroacoustic data important for sustainable development, and what role can the CTBTO play when our oceans are still largely unknown in spite of what they mean for our collective humanity? My project aims to highlight linkages between strengthening SDGs 11, 12, 13, and 14, and the work of the CTBTO with regards to the hydroacoustic network in particular. By using examples of scientific research and civil applications, I try to synthesize the value of the IMS hydroacoustic network, including its data, infrastructure, expertise, users, and arrangements with related parties. There are scientists out there, for example, using acoustic ambient noise to derive temperatures at the less accessible depths of the world's largest heat sink, and also scientists studying noise generation from the disintegration of icebergs, combining hydroacoustics with other kinds of remote sensing methods based on technologies such as satellite and radar. As I looked at more and more examples, a picture began to emerge where it was able to translate existing research outputs of the CTBTO into issue-driven solutions in the context of the SDGs. So innovation lies not always in novelty, but in synthesis, where the impact of the whole surpasses the sum of its parts. In the spirit of leaving no one behind, we want to see more stakeholders on board. We want to see data platforms and communities support values of diversity, equity, and inclusion. One way is to look to the VDEC hydroacoustic data contracts to generate insights about user demographics, areas of ocean science that are enriched by IMS hydroacoustic data, and figure out future outreach efforts. Another is to consider other existing UN frameworks and mechanisms with which the CTBTO could align to advance these SDGs, including the UN Decade of Ocean Science and the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction. The year 2019 is significant as it places us in the 2-year planning phase of the UN Decade of Ocean Science, scheduled to launch officially in 2021. Regional disparities in environmental performance can be reduced through ocean science capacity building, especially in Asia and the Pacific, where 0% of data is available to determine the progress status of SDGs 13 and 14. Integrated management, sufficient coordination, and identifying of emerging issues will be key in advancing ocean science productivity. And according to UN Oceans, any secretariat in the UN system can participate in the interagency coordination mechanism through the direct expression of will. I hope that with this conversation we have started, the question to ask is not why, but why not? So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Javita. And we now have the third presentation, and this presentation will be made by Mr. Didier Birimvirago Namogo from the Democratic Republic of the Congo, who has studied risk and catastrophe management in Liège in Belgium and also has a degree in geology and mining. And he's going to present his project on the implementation of a political and a scientific framework and a national data center. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much for inviting me here. Thank you. Thank you. The purpose of our project is to see in which way we can bring more countries to participate actively in the verification regime of the CTBT, and how it can help them for society development. Why is this? Because many countries have signed and ratified the treaty, but are not actively participating in the CTBT verification regime. What is the cause? The cause is normally the putting into effect of diplomatic relations. Yet, some of these countries face two risks and natural disasters such as earthquakes, volcanoes, tsunami, and so on. They may therefore need IMES data and IDC products from CTBTO to help them manage these risks. As you see at the poster in front of us, we see in the Great Lake region, we see seismic activities which is very high and buildings damaged. We see also volcanic activities from Nyiragongo volcano in the Goma city. The national, we think that the installation of NDCs in these countries could be a good solution for this problem. The installation of national data SnT in these countries can be a tool to awaken the government diplomatic awareness in order to actively participate in the CTBT verification regime. The national data SnT will therefore serve as a diplomatic relay because government members in these countries will even be aware of the direct benefit they derive from using IMES data and IDC products to manage the risks and disasters in their countries. On the other hand, in the Great Lake region countries, they are engulfed by regional armed conflicts. So, if we have exchanges between NDC scientists in these countries, it can contribute to peace building in the region. As scientists speak the same language and always love each other because they have requires them to share everything as scientific data, scientific knowledge, they can bring also their government to build peace in the region. So, such project could bring CYG members to search for young scientists from these countries and raise awareness about the importance of CTBTO and some benefits that they could have in using IMES data and IDC products. This project can therefore contribute to the UN 2030 objectives, risk and disaster management, and peace building. In conclusion, having a NDC well established in any country makes it more visible to the international community, not only in political point of view, but also for contributing into the science promotion. Involving of young scientists through the NDC is very relevant. The countries which have NDC can contribute actively in the verification regime of the CTBT. The national data SnT provide expertise about IMES data, build up national and regional capacities in implementing the treaty, and increase participation in the verification regime. Finally, I can say that this is a challenge because I have to start for the beginning. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Didier. I should also point out that Didier is the only male presenter here from the youth group. So I give kudos to the women who have won overwhelmingly this particular distinction. And I now have the pleasure to give the floor to Ms. Ruhi Nyong and Ms. Aditi Ya, who will be presenting CTBTO for UN 2030, Empowering Diplomacy Through Science in South Asia. And Ms. Ruhi Nyong is a security and foreign policy analyst and the director of the Institute for Peace and Conflict Studies. And Aditi Ya is mostly been working on environmental issues and is also now serving as an environmental specialist consultant at the World Bank. Please, I was just one of you, so my prepping was wrong here.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I will be running quickly through our project, the who, the what, and the why of it. This is a collaborative project, as Angela mentioned, between Ruhi Nyong, who's a security and foreign affairs specialist and director of the Indian think tank, the Institute of Peace and Conflict Studies, and myself, who specializes in environmental policy and governance, and I currently work with the World Bank. We built upon a previous collaboration in the space of hydrodiplomacy in South Asia, where we recognized that even in the face of political deadlocks, there are solutions to be found and decisions to be made that affect the lives of millions of people. And often these solutions lie in the technical and the scientific space. And there's a need to dissolve silos and introduce interdisciplinarity in order to find these solutions. Our project is titled Empowering Diplomacy Through Science, and we explore the historical and political context and find and acknowledge that India's reservations to the treaty are valid. However, we put this aside, and not forgetting this context, we explore the benefits of using IMS data to address climate change and SDG 13 and disaster mitigation. As you all know, India is one of the countries most vulnerable to climate change. 85% of our area is prone to natural disasters and natural hazards of some sort. In 2018, with the onset of the monsoons, Kerala faced massive floods that led to a loss of lives and also estimated losses of over $5 billion. Within this, data has a huge role to play in climate preparedness. And the IMS data is proving disruptive in its accuracy and the advantages that it provides for interpreting climate signals. An example is how, using radionuclide data from the IMS station, scientists have been able to predict the onset of the Indian monsoons 2 months in advance with an error margin of around 3 days, whereas the Indian Met Department is able to do this in advance of only 1 to 3 weeks with an error margin of 5 days. Now, these days have huge implications for livelihoods, for the decisions that farmers make, and for the Indian economy as a whole. And we also know that there are benefits for issuing tsunami warnings and also for understanding signals from the very fragile Himalayas. No one country actually has the potential to have this depth and quality of data. In fact, the radionuclide study that I just mentioned relies on data from both sides of the equator and IMS data from Russia and Australia. So given all of this information, there's a very compelling case for India to consider the use of this data, and it warrants a serious discussion on its merits. And this discussion that can take place through track 1 or track 1.5 dialogues and diplomacy needs to include the scientific bureaucracy of India. It needs to be interdisciplinary, and it needs to include climate change experts, earth scientists, along with foreign policy experts. And that is our project in a nutshell. We will be presenting in more detail our oral presentation on Thursday, and we welcome you to attend. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Aditi, very interesting project, and we're moving right along to the next project, and that is CTBTO education and training in the context of 2 SDGs. One is number 4, quality education, and number 5, gender equality. And that project was prepared by Maria Zadorozhnaya and Ms. Sofia Bukalina, and actually Sofia is the one who is going to be presenting it. And both of them are third-year university students at the National Research Nuclear University. And there she is, yeah.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sofia. I'm a third-year student of Nuclear University MIFI. My major is automatic technologies, and also I am a CIG member. First of all, thank you for this opportunity to be there, to learn more and listen about this organization and to speak about this, about gender equality. As you know, at the CTBTO, even though considerable improvement has been done in gender equality, there is still a lot to do. That's why we linked the CTBTO training and outreach activities with 2 sustainable development goals, namely SDG 4, quality education, and SDG 5, gender equality. We submitted a proposal entitled the CTBTO education and training in the context of the SDG 4 and SDG 5. It was aimed to explore why the technical and scientific fields of this organization are less frequented by women. Our mentor, Ms. Rakfiseha, OSI inspector, has made a tremendous effort to help us in our research. We will present the results of our project today at 3 p.m. in the forum. So if you want to know more about our research, please come and listen to our presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sophia. And now we have the last presentation of the project, and that's a feasibility assessment for geothermal potential in Las Trincheras in Mariara in Venezuela. And the presenter will be Ms. Kayla Remias Loeza. And she is a young researcher at the geophysics department in Venezuela working on seismological research. And she has actually a degree in geophysics and also a master's in petroleum geoscience from Dublin. Please go ahead.
Thank you for welcoming me. I would like to talk to you about a feasibility assessment for geothermal potential in Las Trincheras, Mariara, Venezuela. I would like you to imagine for a moment that the largest oil reserve country goes into renewable energies as geothermal. Probably you have heard that Venezuela has about 300 million barrels, and I wonder if we need to exploit it all. Venezuela at the moment is going through a lot of situations related to energy. And Valencia and Maracay are the most industrialized cities in the country. They hold about 2 million people, and to give energy to this city completely on geothermal energies, we would need about 6.25 wind projects. So the answer relies that there needs to be a balance between the energy consumption. Here we can see in the slide that in the Venezuela map on the right-hand side, the distribution of hot springs across the country, work that was done by Frank Urbani in 1983. This work characterized the hot spring distribution and the water that comes in these hot springs. We can also look at the potential areas worldwide and how this correlates with the map in Venezuela. The red, it's high temperatures. So we would like to see that these hot springs are related to the rain that comes seasonally into the country, reaching higher depths and uprising and bringing higher temperatures. Here we can look at the goals that our project would be taking care of. Those are affordable and clean energies, which the positive sides of it would be to raise awareness of renewable energies in our oil culture country. The second is that the area would benefit from clear and renewable energies, source of energy. The second goal would be sustainable cities and communities. Lowering the risk by understanding how this system works would help to lower understand the seismological hazard in this area through additional studies as microsonation, which MVC is very strengthened at. The benefits that would go for CTBTO pools of analysis would be analysis related to nanoseismicity, pattern recognitions, and events characterization in time and frequency domain, as well as characterization of faults and fractures. For FUMBISIs, the benefits would be understand the seismicity and how this relates to the geothermal source, and lower the seismological hazard, which is one of FUMBISI's main goals. Now we can look at here at this map in the top left side of it, that the place that we would look, we're interested is about 48.5 centigrades Celsius at this at surface. The units are mainly metagranites, which, because of heat radiation, they can provide higher temperatures besides from the working system. Here is the recent seismicity that have been occurring in the country for a year. We're talking about 800 events in 1 year for a community of 2 million people. Very important to understand what is the situation in this area. Here we can look how those events were distributed in time. And we can see that on December we have 4.6 event magnitude, and then we can see two other more events, that is 4.7 and 5.2. So across a year, 800 events. Here is the proposed workflow that we would like to go through. At the moment, we have already gathered all the historical data related to this area. The next steps would be to working out relocalizations, understand more in detail this seismicity, using tools from the CTBTO as Hyperline and ILOC. Further, we would like to, with this relocalization, define a fault plane and then understand how in higher detail with planning surveys, geophysicist surveys. Next stage of the project would be related to integrating all these database. There's seismic events, the geophysical data, the geological data, and finally we will deliver a report related to how this geothermal system could be working in the area. I would like to invite you to the forum at 9:30 on Thursday. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kyla. And each of the presenters has already told you that they will be making a detailed presentation at different times. It's listed in the program, or you can look up on the app. And I would encourage you to go and question them. I find it fascinating that each of you covered very different areas. It was a very wide variety of projects that you undertook. And on behalf of all of us on the panel, I wanted to congratulate you on getting the prize, so to say. Now we have 5 more minutes, and I'm willing to take one question. It could be either to the SDG presenters, or it could be to the panel. It's a little hard for me to see because we're blinded by the light and you're all a little bit in the dark. So I have to rely on the floor to help me here. So if there is a question, please, this is your chance to speak up. Now, either we've answered all of your questions, or you're so hungry that you really don't want to spend any more time to wait. There's one question, yes, the gentleman here in the front. I don't know if we have a microphone.
My name's Piers Corden, long association with CTBT. My science training was in physics of solids. And I admit to a certain degree of affection for renewable energy. And Ambassador Bernhard, I'm just a little bit skeptical that your assessment of the importance of nuclear energy remains as relevant as it might have been several years ago. My understanding of the improvements in the cost effectiveness and availability of renewable energies, solar in particular, are such that the need to continue to use the dual use technologies involved in enrichment reactors and reprocessing is perhaps relevant for climate sustainability as it was in the past. And these dual-use technologies, of course, have the Achilles heel of being the difficulties that we're dealing with Iran and the DPRK, if not other states that have nuclear power facilities at the moment. So whether you want to comment on that or just let it ride, that's okay.
Well, was this addressed to you, Anna Maria?
For Ambassador.
Oh, for you, I'm sorry.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's a very relevant remark, and certainly the question of maybe turning more to nuclear energy is a controversial one. And in some countries, there will be no question of it. Some countries are moving away from nuclear energy. But what I think is that at least for quite some time to come, the renewables in which, for example, in Denmark, we think we are almost world champions in wind energy. But maybe therefore we also realize that this is not enough for some time to come. And therefore what I think and what I think we see in some countries, maybe especially East Asia, and some others will come, I think that nuclear energy will not be the dominating energy source, but it will be part of the energy mix. And that's why I think that the guarantees which the CTBTO and the IEA can provide will be very relevant in a development like that.
Maybe I can just add something, being German. Of course, Germany has phased out nuclear energy as of 2025, as you know, and there is a tremendous debate going on, basically, how can we replace it? And how can we best do it? But the other area that I find very relevant in this case is, of course, nuclear energy is here to stay for some time, but it's also the expansion of nuclear power plants that are being built, particularly in Saudi Arabia. And there's a lot of controversy in Saudi Arabia. I know you're putting down your thumb, and the others didn't see that, but basically because there is an exemption that the Saudis are asking to enrich their own uranium, and this is not the gold standard that everyone is supposed to adhere to when they're getting a nuclear power plant. But it's a lot of it in terms of who is developing and who is actually delivering those power plants to Saudi Arabia. And I think there's a political question there that I think we should leave unaddressed at this point. But those of you who know about this are aware of what's going on there. Now, I'm not quite sure that's a really good note to end on before lunch, but I know it will provide for some discussion during lunchtime. So let me again thank everyone, particularly my panelists here, and also the SDG youth members, and give them a big hand.
Saying